Ready?
Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Ask you all to rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call a roll.
Commissioner Leo Molita.
Present.
Commissioner Nora Dukas. Here. Chair Bill Bartels.
Here.
Commissioner Richard Rodriguez.
Here.
Commissioner Michael Weissner.
Present. Come now to item 4, public comments. This is a time set aside for comments by citizens on matters not appearing on the agenda. I have no speaker cards. Hearing no one, moving to item 5, approval of the August 21st, 2008 minutes. Commission?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
I second, but I have a comment.
Comment away.
Page 7. The first full sentence says, Dr. Hale found that the sound from the events he attended violated any county noise ordinance to his understanding. Should that be did not violate?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to then second the motion with that change.
One other. Okay. Hearing no other comments, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed or abstaining?
I'll abstain.
I have to abstain.
Item 6, LU 060105, Kenneth High variance. Nicole Donner. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Nicole Donner, and I am presenting the variance request, LU 06-0105. This is a variance request located in the Muscle Shoals community, which is located in the north coast area of the unincorporated area of the county of Ventura. The applicant, Mr. High, and he's also the property owner, is in the audience this morning. As you can see, the site is on the coast, Muscle Shoals community. And the zoning and general plan and coastal area plan affects this property. The zoning is RB, 3,000 square foot minimum lot size. The general plan designation is existing community, and the coastal area plan designation is residential high, 6.1 units to 36 units per acre. The project is a request for approval of variance to construct a 133 square foot addition to an existing single family of 1,356 square feet without providing the 2 required parking spaces. This is a photo of the existing single family dwelling taken from Breakers Way, looking toward the ocean. As you can see, it is very close to the front property line. And in fact, Breakers Way is a private property, or a private road, excuse me. And the dwelling was actually built in 1930 in La Conchita and moved onto the site in 1951. When it was moved onto the site, it was actually situated on the lot pretty close to the front property line. In fact, it encroaches into the front setback by 4 feet. And as you can see, there is no garage existing on the site. This is the rear of the property from the ocean side, looking toward the hills. And as you can see, there's a deck and a French door to the left. That is the location of the addition, where the addition will be. This is a more detailed photo of that site. It's the area of the addition, where the addition will be not more than 15.5 feet in height. It is an enlargement of an existing bedroom of a 2-bedroom, 2-bath home. This is an area right across from the subject property, and it is a Caltrans-owned property, and it consists of about 25 parking spaces. This is where the applicant currently parks, and 3 other resident homeowners, property owners park in that area. This is a site plan. The addition will be to the left. It expands the existing bedroom, and it will fit onto that site pretty easily. As you can tell, or onto the right of that, there's a detail of a basement. This house, when it was built, had a basement built underneath it. It's built on wood piers and did not have very much grading when it was actually placed on the site in 1951. So it does slope down toward the ocean. Come on. Variance findings. Under Section 8181 4.2 of the Coastal Zoning Ordinance, there are 6 findings that have to be made in order to approve this project. Of the 6, 5 really only apply to this project. The 6th is regarding hazardous waste facilities. Finding 1, we must make that there is a special circumstance or exceptional characteristic to the physical aspects of the site. I think we have. Staff is recommending that there is special circumstances, and this is due to the placement of the house in 1951 very close to the front property line, which makes it non-conforming in that respect, and the fact that it doesn't have any parking. In order to place parking on the site, you would have to demolish part of the front of the house and possibly part of the basement. And when it was built, there really was no reason to have covered parking at that point, because the slope of the lot wasn't really, the house was not designed to have parking. It's on wood piers. It wouldn't support a garage in that front area. Finding 2, granting the request will not confer special privilege, inconsistent with limitations on other properties in the same vicinity and zone. There are 5 variances that have been approved, as you can see on Table 1 of the staff report, and 3 of those variances were for parking deviations, relief from a certain amount of parking, whether it be the size of the parking space or reduction of the parking requirement. And therefore, staff recommends that that is also met, that finding is also met. Finding 3, strict application of the zoning regulations as they apply will result in practical difficulties or unnecessary hardships. Staff is recommending that, yes, there would be a hardship as described in Section B1 of the staff report, in the fact that in order to construct parking, you would literally have to demolish half the house. Finding 2, the granting of such variance will not be detrimental to public health, safety, or general welfare. As you can see in your staff report, I think it's Exhibit 9, there is a letter from the Property Owners Association. They have no concerns. They, in fact, state that they support the finding, the variance, and that they have no problem with the fact there is no garage on that site. And the existing area is mainly 2-story residences that are very large. This site is an existing 1-story. It will remain 1-story, the same character, just a little bit of larger bedroom. We're not adding any new bedrooms in order to increase, in such that there is no increase in parking demand. Finding 5, all development authorized by the variance is consistent with all applicable standards of the local coastal program. Yes, this is met. The addition will meet all the setbacks and is basically consistent with the local coastal program. There is parking, although it is off-site, and Caltrans has basically said we're not seeing any changes to that parking area. He's still parking in that area right now, so that will not change. It's just an enlargement of the bedroom. Recommended actions. The staff has determined that this project is categorically exempt from CEQA under Section 15301E of it, and that is basically existing facilities that will not expand more than 50% of the existing structure's footprint. So we find that we recommend that you find the project is categorically exempt from CEQA. We find, based on the evidence presented in the staff report and at the hearing, that the permit standards are met. We recommend that you adopt the staff recommended findings in Section B based on the evidence presented, and we recommend approval of the variance case number LU 060105 subject to the attached conditions, Exhibit 8, and designate the clerk of the Planning Commission as the custodian of the records. And that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions.
Questions? Yes, I have 2 questions, please. Have there been any additional comments from the neighbors other than the letter we received from the homeowners association since this was published?
Chair Bartels, Commissioner Weissner, no, there has been no comments from other homeowners. In fact, well, actually, I'm sorry, there has. The neighbor 3 houses down, it was in support of it, and his actual, I believe it was his father or his grandfather, actually placed another house in the same vicinity, and they were friends at the time.
Okay.
So.
My second question is a follow-up to Caltrans. When you were talking, this is a Caltrans parking lot. My
Yes.
assumption is it's a public parking lot?
Yes, it's public parking.
Okay, and they made no requirements or requests as far as the continued use by the applicant to park his cars there?
No, they haven't.
So there's no restrictions that they brought forward to you?
There's no restrictions.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm curious, with regard to the parking and with the anticipated construction in that area by Caltrans, I'm wondering if that's going to be impacting that parking area. And secondarily, so the lot is on an incline and it's created some sort of subterranean area.
Right.
That basement, I assume, is behind a seawall.
There is a retaining wall, and actually, I have a photo of the basement that was not in your packet, but I made copies for your information that you can see that basement area and how it is elevated up on wood piers. But yes, there is a basement, and then there's a retaining wall that has an area of basement area, storage area. With regard to Caltrans, they did not mention any further construction improvements in that particular area, the parking area, and they don't expect any.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you. I would open the public hearing. Disclosures? Commissioner Molitor?
I received no other information than what we have in the packet. I did visit the site this week and saw the house, saw the parking. When I was there, there were no cars at all, but I was there during the middle of the day. There were no cars at all parked in that parking area. That's it.
Commissioner Dukas?
I visited the site yesterday. I did speak with some neighbors and didn't get their name. They said, go ahead and let them do it.
Commissioner Weissner?
I have no other information other than what's in the packet. I did not visit the site. However, I have visited Muscle Shoals many times over my tenure on this commission, so I'm very familiar with the project and the location and the applicant. I guess I need to disclose that too, don't I? Wait a minute. When I say familiar, I know him, I can't say professionally either. That wouldn't sound right.
Not a good idea.
No, he's appeared before the commission several times, and also we're attorneys, so we run into each other in the lovely building across the street.
Commissioner Rodriguez. I'm familiar with the area, and I've been there several times, not in the last, not recently. And I pulled it up last night on Google just to see what it looked like aerially, to supplement what's in the package here.
I too have a great deal of familiarity with the site, and I actually know this house. So my family on both sides had property in Muscle Shoals a long time ago. So nothing in the packet, however, is there is no other information than other in the packet. Mr. High.
Yes, I'm Ken High. I'm the applicant. I just have a couple of comments to help explain some of the answers that were given to the previous questions. The basement was actually put under the house. Most of the basement was put under the house under a site plan modification approved by the Planning Commission about 10 years ago. It was put in with an engineered concrete poured wall to support the deck, and that created the space under the deck. So it was kind of a after result of supporting the deck with that poured concrete wall. So then, as far as the Caltrans thing is concerned, I've been intimately involved with the Caltrans project for the freeway widening, having to do with the sound walls there. I'm the sort of head of the association dealing with Caltrans, and none of the designs that have that are almost finalized intend to use any of this property on the beach side of the current fence, which is, demarking the freeway from the land outside the freeway area. And indeed, we're actually seeking to have, again, for the second time, after 15 years ago when it was done, to have the land declared excess land and by Caltrans and given back to the property owners. But it takes forever to get anything like that done. It was actually done by an act of the legislature 15 years ago, and then it was taken back by Caltrans from Park District, and because they were keeping all options open at that time. But now that the freeway has reached a point of final design here, then that's going back on track. So this parking area has been used for 50 years, is going to be used forever after. As far as the bedroom is concerned, just one, I know it was in the packet, I know it was said, but the bedroom's only like 7 feet wide right now. It's 9 feet, but there's a closet that was built in there. So consequently, the bed's sideways. And you can only enter it through the master bedroom, because it was originally a laundry. So consequently, the point of this is just to be able to create a usable second bedroom. And nobody can see it, except for one neighbor, and it's the side of the house with 2 windows. So it's about as hidden as you could possibly have an addition. And this house sets substantially back from all the other houses that are along there because it's such a small house. So it also can't really be seen from the beach or from either other house. So it's about as buried a little addition as you could possibly do. And literally, it talks about you have to demolish part of the house to build the 2-car garage. Well, I submit you really won't have anything left, because it takes the entire front of the house with the kitchen, the master bedroom, and everything else. You just have to tear down the entire house to start over, and it just isn't needed. So I appreciate your assistance. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you. I have no other cards. Is there anyone wishing to speak on this item? Close the public hearing. Oh, I'm sorry, rebuttal by staff. Close the public hearing. Commission?
I'd like to move the recommended actions and incorporate the picture of the basement into the record.
Is there a second?
I will second that motion, and I want to compliment Nicole and the planning department on putting together this project. I think here's an example where something needed to be done by a resident, and it benefited him and he didn't have to tear his house down to do it. So thank you for making a nice presentation.
Motion is second. Any other comments?
Yeah, I feel uncomfortable letting Ken get away with this so easily. But given the past history, I guess you're entitled to one. Okay. We've raked him over the coals enough up here.
Any other comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Have a nice time at your house. Okay, for this next item, there are additional seats down in front, and I don't know what the capacity of the room is, but I would prefer to not have the fire marshal come and tell us that you all can't be here. So if people could find a seat, that would be very helpful. I don't know. Is there? Okay. I guess I'd pose it to the techs upstairs. Is it possible to get the monitors out in the foyer area working? Okay. Okay.
There are more seats down the front. If you want to step forward.
Okay, just to sort of lay out what we're doing here today. This is an appeal, and as such, the applicant is the appellant. And so what will happen is we'll have the presentation of the staff report, questions of the staff by the commission, and then I will open the public hearing, and we will have a presentation by the applicant, and in this case that is the appellant. All right. I have a very large number of these orange cards which will be distributed as we are hearing this to the commission so everyone can take a look at them. And then I also have speaker cards. We will have the presentation by the applicant, in this case the appellant, and then presentations by people in opposition to the project, in this case opposing the appeal, and then rebuttal by the applicant, and then closing comments by staff, at which point we will close the public hearing, and then the commission will have a deliberation. All right? Just so everyone knows, this is a hearing, and so as we go through this, please be respectful of both sides, and also please be respectful of the fact that the commission is here to hear this, and having worked with this commission for a long time, the group of people sitting up here work very hard to hear both sides. So, having said that, let's move into this. Mr. Clement.
Good morning, Commissioner, Chair, members of the Commission. Top of the morning, my name is Dan Clement. I'm staff, and I'll be presenting staff's recommendations and analysis on the Cornerstone project, or more specifically, 2 items that have arisen since the application was provided to the Planning Division. But before I go into my presentation, I just want to make it clear on the record that since the time at which the staff report was published and distributed to all of you, we received a number of emails, the majority of which were distributed to you from Ms. Addison yesterday via email, and then one additional email that I received this morning, which I believe she gave a copy to all of you. And just in general, there are 74 emails in general support for the project and 6 in opposition.
Excuse me, would you please move those mics a little closer, speak into them? Thank you.
You got it. Give me power. There we go. So a little information on the background of this project. Project site's located in the Tierra Rojada Valley. It's within the Tierra Rojada Greenbelt area. The site's adjacent to Tierra Rojada Road. It does not have an assigned address. It's adjacent to the City of Simi Valley's jurisdiction, and it's located within the City of Moore Park's area of interest, and it has an open space land use designation and an open space 40-acre minimum lot size zoning designation. Property is roughly 139 acres. It's currently undeveloped. Excuse me. There we go. I think the battery's dying on this, or user error. So just some background on the CUP application. The application consists of 3 primary uses. First being a church, second being a college, third being industrial facilities for the Children's Hunger Fund, which I'll refer to as CHF throughout the rest of my presentation. Project includes approximately 93,000 square feet of classrooms and administrative buildings and ancillary buildings which would be used both by the college and the church. Approximately 92,000 square feet of warehousing, loading, and administrative facilities for the CHF facilities. And then approximately 195,000 square feet for ancillary facilities, which would include an outdoor amphitheater, athletic fields, parking areas, and a packaged sewage treatment plant. Now, to clarify, what is not being presented to you today is a decision on whether or not to approve the CUP application, which has been presented to the Planning Division, but rather there are 2 items that are under consideration today. The first being an equivalency determination and an appeal of that equivalency determination by Cornerstone Church made by the Planning Director, which I will describe in detail in a moment. And the second has to do with the application of the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, or what I will refer to as RULEPA throughout the rest of my presentation. Sorry about all the acronyms. It's just a lot easier to say than spell out all the words. And whether or not we should accept the application for the CUP for the church and the CHF facilities, despite the fact that these uses are not currently allowed in the open space zone under the current zoning ordinance provisions. So, taking the equivalency determination and the appeal first, in their revised application to us, Cornerstone Church made an argument that the CHF facilities are equivalent to 2 uses that are currently allowed in the open space zone. The first being community centers for farm workers and nonprofit farm worker organizations. The second being principal structures related to agriculture. The full line item matrix title is provided in the staff report and here on the slide. I'm just going to abbreviate it rather than inundate you with all these words throughout the rest of the presentation. So, if I could get this to work. There we go. So Cornerstone is arguing that the CHF facilities are equivalent to the community centers that are allowed in the open space zone and these principal structures related to agriculture based upon 3 reasons. First being that the CHF facilities, similar to the types of community centers that are used by the organizations that are allowed in the open space zone, they're both nonprofit organizations, so they're similar in that way. Second is that CHF has provided, and they claim that they would continue to provide goods to migrant workers in Ventura County who may or may not be employed or reside in the open space designated areas. And then finally, CHF is arguing that similar to the sorts of distribution and packaging activities that occur in principal structures related to agriculture, the CHF facilities would also conduct similar types of activities. However, the distribution and packaging activities would be for the distribution of goods throughout the world, not necessarily to the open space zone. So, the planning director considered their equivalency argument and rejected it. And the planning director rejected the argument based primarily on the fact that whereas the 2 uses that are currently allowed in the open space zone actualize the goals and purposes of the open space zone, the CHF facilities would not, or at most would only very indirectly be consistent with the goals and purposes of the open space zone. So what are those goals? Well, they're to preserve natural and agricultural resources that are found within these areas, to allow for development and recreational uses which are contingent upon the types of resources you find in these areas, and then to limit development within areas that are subject to natural disasters such as flooding, landslides, And finally, to keep urban development in those areas which are designated for that type of development, namely the cities and the existing communities which have been identified in the general plan. Okay, so the community centers that would be serving farm workers and nonprofit farm worker organizations, clearly they're designed for providing services for employees that either are employed or reside in the open space zone. As I mentioned earlier, the CHF facilities, they would provide charitable goods possibly to migrant workers who might be employed in the open space areas, but we can't guarantee that. These facilities, like I mentioned earlier, are designed more for the worldwide distribution of these sorts of goods. So they're not geared specifically towards uses that are allowed within the open space area. And as such, the planning director doesn't find them equivalent. Second, although the CHF facilities would, once again, they might provide goods and services to farm workers who might be employed in the open space area. In contrast, the principal structures related to agricultural uses are just that. They're geared primarily for facilitating agricultural development in the open space zone. CHF, once again, indirectly at most, is related to these types of uses. So based upon these reasons, the planning director did not find the CHF facilities to be equivalent to community centers for farm workers organizations, or principal structures related to agriculture. And Cornerstone has appealed that denial of the equivalency determination to you today for consideration. Now, on to the bigger question. Well, Cornerstone's making the argument that regardless of how you decide on the equivalency determination, they feel that the county is obligated to process their application, not only for the CHF facilities, but for the church, based upon our RULEPA and more specifically, the equal terms provision of that law. As I mentioned earlier, the CHF facilities, which are essentially an industrial type of use, and the church are explicitly not allowed in the open space zone under the current zoning regulations. However, pursuant to this federal law that was passed in 2000, Cornerstone's making the argument that because these other types of uses, which they feel are equivalent to what they're proposing, are currently allowed in the open space zone, they should be allowed consideration of their application as well, based upon equal terms provision, which states, no government shall impose or implement a land use regulation in the manner that treats a religious assembly or institution on less than equal terms with a non-religious assembly or institution. There we go. So, Cornerstone is saying that the prohibition on the church and the CHF facilities in the open space zone violates the equal terms provision of our RULEPA. And the way you can get about making that determination is by asking a question which has been derived from case law, and I'm sure Mr. Kwong will be able to fill you in on the details of it. But that question is, would the church and CHF facilities cause greater harm to the governmental objectives of open space designated lands than secular land uses that are or have been conditionally permitted within these areas? And obviously, Cornerstone feels that they can make that argument, and in doing so, they point to a number of secular institutions and assemblies that have been permitted in open space areas or were permitted at a time which predated the open space designations. Subsequent to their being allowed on the property, they were subject to open space land use designations and a rezoning to open space. And Cornerstone's arguing that these facilities, namely Ronald Reagan Library and what was not included in your packet, but what Mr. Rubens is going to argue in a second, the Todd Road Jail, they're equivalent in size, scale, capacity, use, and are equally, if not more, inconsistent with the goals and purposes of the open space zone than what Cornerstone is proposing as part of the church and CHF facilities. As such, relying upon the equal terms provision of our RULEPA, they are arguing that the county is mandated to accept their application for a CUP for processing. So, if you accept their argument, what does this mean? Well, currently the application is incomplete. They still have a number of materials and information that needs to be submitted in order for the county to continue its review, deem the application complete, and then begin the environmental review process. The application would be subject to all of the standard procedures of CEQA. We know, based upon information that's already been submitted, unless the project description is revised and they incorporate mitigation measures into the project description, the project is likely going to require an EIR for a number of reasons. That would be subject to public review, and then ultimately the applications would be presented to you for a decision as to whether or not it should be approved or denied at a notice of public hearing, similar to all CUP applications. So, what are our recommended actions? In regards to the equivalency determination, we're stating that you adopt a resolution to deny the appeal and uphold the planning director's determination that the Children's Hunger Fund facilities are not equivalent to community centers for farm workers and nonprofit farm worker organizations or principal structures related to agriculture. Obviously, I'm summarizing the actions. These are stated verbatim in your staff report. The resolution should be based upon that language, not what I just stated. But in regards to, if I could get the next slide up, the question on the applicability of RULEPA to the application and whether or not the county should accept the application for processing, the planning director deferred that decision to you, so we're not making a recommendation on it. However, aren't you lucky this morning? And if you have any questions about that, I'd be more than happy to answer them to give you whatever guidance you might be seeking, for whatever I can provide you. But that concludes my presentation. Thanks a whole lot.
Questions? Madam? No.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Instead of applying for a CUP, couldn't they just apply for a zone change?
Yes. This is a precedent-setting decision in the sense that under normal circumstances, if they're to walk up to the planning counter and say, okay, we want to build the church and CHF facilities, what we would tell them to do is, okay, you need to apply for a zone text amendment to change the zoning ordinance to allow those sorts of uses in the open space zone. That's one option, and they wouldn't have to rely upon RULEPA. And of course, the zone text amendment would be subject to your approval, your recommendations to the Board of Supervisors who would ultimately make a decision on it. They could apply for a zone change, but that would require a change in the land use designation. Change in the land use designation would warrant a SOAR vote in order to do that because it's in an open space area.
But there's no dead end here. There are other avenues.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not to Dan, but to County Council, that's two things, Robert, is one, in the appellant's argument, they brought up the definition of a college done by Webster. I know California has an educational code. Were you able to get any information on that for us?
I was given a heads up by my colleague about that question regarding the definition of a college. If the term is not specifically defined in your non-coastal zoning ordinance, terms that are not defined are really deferred to the planning director, who then uses her best efforts to define such term. In that section of the non-coastal zoning ordinance, it allows her or him to use Webster's dictionary or other statutory definitions if they exist with regards to that definition. So in the case of college, yes, I was not able in the short time that I was researching the item to find that definition for college in the Ed Code, although it's used extensively throughout, as you well know. And there's also the definition for Webster. So either one of them are applicable in that case, and it's really the planning director's call when it's not specifically defined in the non-coastal zoning ordinance. And if I might just take this opportunity, since I have the mic, just to direct the commission through Chair Bartels, that the question first and foremost is the appeal question. Then, once that is answered, then the subsequent questions of deferral to the Planning Commission with regards to our RULEPA should be then handled. So, just wanted to make that very clear. You should handle, I think, from a decision-making standpoint, the appeal first. And then, I'm sorry, Commissioner Weissner, you had one more question.
Yes, I did, and it's more for as we go through this process, because it's my concern. I think we're being asked to make a legal conclusion here, and I'm uncomfortable with that, since we have a federal law and a local ordinances, and in this equivalency question, I think we're being asked to a legal conclusion. So if later on, as we go through our deliberation, if you can kind of walk us through that and give us some guidance, I'd appreciate it.
I was planning to do that. I was planning to give you just a bit of a history, and I'm sure that Mr. Rubens has, in his presentation, a little bit of a background on the federal law in question, but I wanted to give you a little background of the federal law and how it came to be, and then we can talk more extensively about the applicable case law that applies in this case.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Yes.
Commissioner Chair, just to follow up to Commissioner Weissner's first question regarding the definition of college, we did research to find out at what point colleges and universities were added to the open space zone and to look for a clear definition. What was intended? Was it specifically geared towards educational sorts of facilities as compared to the general term that complied to educational facilities, or just assemblies in general? There's nothing on record regarding that. However, discussions with Bruce Smith and a number of other planners who have been around for some time, they mentioned that was, according to their memory, clearly designed to allow for educational sorts of facilities. So,
Well, just so you bring, I'm very familiar with K through 12 and also how it applies to community colleges. And I know it's very definitive in that regard, but as far as a four-year institution, those kinds of things, I just want to make sure that we at least had an evaluation of the state education code, if they had any specific delineated legislation or comments in that area. Thank you.
great.
Just a technical question. Does Cornerstone Community Church own this land at this time?
You closed escrow just a few weeks ago, correctly? That is correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions at this time? All right. Having been presented a new script, we come now to disclosures by commissioners, to which I read, at this time, I would like to ask each planning commissioner to state on the record whether or not he or she has received any oral or written ex parte communication regarding this agenda item that is not already contained in the record before us on this matter. Please disclose the substance of that information only if that information is not contained in the record before us on this matter. Commissioners. Commissioner Weissner.
I have received no ex parte communication or discussion by anyone, which I find very surprising, being an elder in the Moore Park Presbyterian Church. Nobody approached me. And the other thing is, obviously being a 25-year resident of Moore Park, I've driven by this property many times, and I did so Saturday, and just from the chair out of road, just viewed it. Other than that, no.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
I've also driven by the property many times, have not received any communication from anyone outside, with information outside what we have in this package. I did pull up several addresses on the computer last night and to do an aerial view of those locations, see where they're at right now, since they're mentioned in one of the reports that we done in one of the reports we got from staff. So I have aerial views of the present location of First Bible Church in Clement, Cornerstone Community Church, Glory House, Eternal Bible College, and CHF for my viewing. Again, these are all off of Google.
Robert, just a question relative to this. It's not in our packet. I viewed the same thing. I didn't make copies. So if it comes on the dais, do we ultimately make it part of the record?
I would recommend that you make it a part of the record and just enter it in. There's simply information that is freely accessible, and if you are relying upon that in part of some of your discussions, it'd be better off put in the record.
Okay. Commissioner Dukas?
I also did the same aerial Google search. I love that thing. And looked at the CHF facilities in Pacoima. And I live fairly close by to the land, so I'm familiar with it. I also, and I don't know whether this even applies, but I go online and I read the newspaper and the comments. It's just general information that's out there, and I don't know if that needs disclosure or whether that's assumed that people keep themselves informed or what.
I think it's sufficient that you've indicated that you've read the newspaper and that that's part of some of the information you know about this project.
And so I'm aware of the controversial part of this anyway through that.
Commissioner Molitor?
I've been by the area a few times, but not recently. I was approached at a social function about 2 weeks ago and asked about the project. I said I am not free to discuss it, and I don't even think about it until I receive my packet and I get all the information.
My disclosure is I've driven by this site many times and also do read the paper, so I've been aware of this sort of wending its way to us. Other than that, and I went and looked at Google. At this point, I would open the public hearing. And I have 4 speaker cards by the applicant, and Jack Rubens, Dave Phillips, Rick Parkinson, and also Sharon Noel. And I guess I would ask that, as you are the applicant, if you could state your name for the record, but also be in charge of how we're going to hear this thing from your side. If there are any other orange cards, feel free quietly to come down and give them to the secretary from the side. Thank you. Mr. Rubens.
Good morning, Commissioner. Planning. Oh, thank you. I was just looking. There it is. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Jack Rubens. I'm a land use attorney with the Shepherd Mullen Law Firm, and I'm appearing today on behalf of Cornerstone Community Church, the applicant for the Cornerstone Tahara Rehata campus. And we appreciate the opportunity to be able to discuss this issue with you. And when I say this issue, this presentation is going to be almost exclusively about the deferral issues, the issues where the Planning Commission, Planning Director has asked you to determine whether or not RULEPA applies with respect to the proposed church and proposed Children's Hunger Fund facilities, and whether those uses must be considered to be conditionally permitted uses under the county's zoning ordinance. We'll speak briefly about the appeal issues at the end, but I'd have to respectfully disagree with the County Council that if the Planning Commission determines that RULEPA applies here to those uses, then the appeal actually becomes moot, because the Children's Hunger Fund facilities would be considered conditionally permitted uses under RULEPA, and therefore it no longer matters whether they are equivalent to other conditionally permitted uses that are listed in the zoning ordinance. So that's the way we're approaching the presentation in any event. And there has been a lot of confusion about this issue. I've also read the newspaper articles that some of you referred to, and I've seen the emails that you've received. And there is a fundamental misunderstanding, I think, among some at least, as to what it is we're here to talk about today. While almost all of the emails were supportive and letters were supportive, the few that were in opposition said things such as, the church is seeking special treatment, the church is seeking an exemption from the county zoning laws, the church is seeking a variance. And none of those things are true. What the church is actually seeking is not special treatment. What they're seeking is equal treatment. And that's the reason RULEPA exists, as I'm going to talk about it in a moment to add on to what Mr. Clement told you. And by the way, we very much appreciate Mr. Clement's presentation. It was very balanced and to the point, and has already helped, I think, to dispel some of the confusion that has surrounded these issues. The decision before you today, just to emphasize one point, is not whether this is a good project, not whether you should approve the project, not what the merits of the project are. We think eventually you should, and we think it has a lot of merit, but the issue before you today is simply the narrow and unfortunately the legal issue, as you mentioned, Commissioner Weissner, of whether or not under RULEPA, notwithstanding that the zoning code does not say that the church and the CHF facilities are conditionally permitted uses, that they must be treated as such under federal law. And I also want to add one other point at the outset. The college, and while I appreciated your question, Commissioner Weissner, about the college, at least today, for the moment, that issue is not actually before you, because staff has accepted the college as being a conditionally permitted use, and when we provide the additional information that's required to complete the application, it will be processed. And by the way, just to let you know, while we do have to provide some additional information to the county staff, the application is about 95% complete, if not more. We've provided hundreds of pages of technical reports and voluminous amounts of information totaling, I think, more than 800 pages. There are a few items, though, that we've been asked to add into the application to supplement those materials, and we're in the process of doing so, and I think we'll shortly be able to submit the rest of the information. So with that, let me turn to the PowerPoint presentation up on the screen, and hopefully I know how to use this now. There we go. I think I've already talked about the first page, and we are going to focus on the deferred issues. You've already been told about the project. I just want to emphasize that it's taken a long time just to get to this point. The original application, as you can see, was submitted getting close to a year and a half ago. And we received, or the church received a letter on July 20th of 2007 asking for a lot of additional information, which was provided in April of this year in a revised application. And we have now received a second letter that has a much smaller list of things to provide to the county and that we're in the process of providing. But the reason that Cornerstone has been willing to and has expended so much effort and so many dollars, frankly, and so much time is, notwithstanding the issue we're talking about today, is because they do very firmly believe, and frankly I very firmly believe, that RULEPA unequivocally does apply here, and for the reasons I'm about to talk about, must be treated in the same manner as other uses that in fact are conditionally permitted and have much greater, or can have much greater impact and have had much greater impact than this project would. Moving. I think you already all know where the project site is. You'll notice on the right that while I'm not going to discuss the merits of the project per se, because that's not before you, you need to know something about this project to be able to make an informed decision, so I'm going to tell you a few things. The project is about 60% open space. The top part with the hash marks is the development footprint. The bottom portion of the site to the south would be permanently preserved as open space as part of this project. So while the zoning ordinance does obviously allow different types of developments and improvements to be constructed in the open space zone, one byproduct of this process would be that will never happen for 60% of this property. It will forever be open space. And as some of you may know, it is adjacent actually to existing Recreation and Park District land just to the right, to the east. Here's a few more facts about the project. You heard some of them from Mr. Clement. I might just emphasize a few points. There is a total of 184,000 square feet of improvements over a 100-acre site, so it's actually a very low-density project. And there really is a focus on green development here. Note that other than the CHF structures, the other structures, the 6 buildings, will all be shared by the church and the college. So the college is going to go forward, and if that is approved, that's going to be constructed in any event. There is no primary church structure for this project. The primary venue for worship services will be an outdoor sanctuary that will seat 3,000 people. And you can see it in the lower right-hand corner there. I'll show you a larger rendition in a moment. There are athletic fields. They are going to be made available to the public. They do provide a buffer, as you'll see in a moment, to the improvements as they are viewed from Tahara-Rahata Road. The parking areas are going to be grasscrete, which means they're going to look like grass when you see them, rather than being concrete. And as I think Mr. Clement mentioned, there will be an on-site water treatment system that will include the use of reclaimed water. These structures are mission-style, low-rise structures in keeping with the architecture of the area, and I think particularly of the Reagan Library to the south, which is very close to this site. There it is. And there's the overall site plan. I know you've seen it already, and you can see the buildings are in 2 clusters to really minimize the amount of improvements and where they're located. So they're basically in 2 clusters, and again, they're low-rise. And you can see where the Children's Hunger Fund structures are going to be located. And there's little larger views of what some of the buildings will look like in the outdoor sanctuary. And of course, you know, the Cornerstone Community Church already has an established presence in this community. They're currently in Simi Valley. You're looking at the front of their main building. It is an established ministry for congregations of families from throughout Ventura County, particularly the Simi Valley area and the unincorporated area around it. They engage in a lot of activities, as most large churches do these days. Not only do they have religious-based worship, they have many educational and religious classes and activities for children, youth, and adults at their current facilities. The purpose of this project would be to accommodate a growing membership in the church, and also to expand the facilities for the college, which is also growing, and of course also to allow the introduction of the Children's Hunger Fund facilities at this site, which we'll talk more about in a moment. Whoop, did I skip something? Yeah. The Children's Hunger Fund facilities are a central component of this project, and after I speak, Dave Phillips, the founder and president of the Children's Hunger Fund, is going to speak for a couple of minutes to really give you some detail on what the Children's Hunger Fund is all about. But it is a very fine and reputable organization that does great good around the world. They're well known for the fact that virtually all of the goods that are donated to them, I believe it's in the 99% range, do reach the impoverished, the poor, and including farm workers and others in Ventura County, which Dave is going to speak to. Mr. Clement referred to this as essentially an industrial use. I suppose in a very, very technical sense that may be true, but that's not the reality here. The reality is it's a very low intensity use. As stated on the slide, there's going to be approximately 3 truck trips a day to either deliver or take out goods that are donated and then packaged at the facility. Most of the activity on the site is just in the form of training of individuals to be able to go out and work on behalf of CHF. On Saturday mornings, families come and package the food packs and other kinds of packages of goods for the families who are going to receive them. It's a very family-oriented organization, and it's really centered on nonprofit charity. They do need 2 buildings, relatively small buildings, to simply store the goods temporarily. And they do have a relatively small training center, about 28,000 feet, to train individuals and to have various educational events and learning events. But it's a very low scale and low intensity use. And as Mr. Clement told you, on the deferral, there are 2 issues. I think they're really all in all the same issue, but you are looking at, under RULEPA, are the church facilities a conditionally permitted use, and are the CHF facilities a conditionally permitted use? Both of them are obviously religious-based. So we come to RULEPA, and I understand County Council is going to tell you more about this, and I don't want to do a long sermon about, no pun intended, about RULEPA, but let me just address it for a moment. RULEPA was adopted because it was seen by Congress that in local jurisdictions around the country, in some cases, the zoning ordinances of these jurisdictions, or sometimes even their general plans, did and do treat religious uses on less than equal terms than similar secular uses. So you can have a zoning code where certain uses are permitted or conditionally permitted that can impact the areas in which they're located, while religious uses were not permitted. And there's been a lot of judicial decisions on the subject since RULEPA was adopted in 2000, and a lot of action with respect to the equal terms provision that Mr. Clement talked to you about. And even though he read it, I think it's important maybe to take one more look at it, because it is the crux of everything you're thinking about today. No government shall impose or implement a land use regulation in a manner that treats a religious assembly or institution on less than equal terms with a non-religious assembly or institution. And we cite below that just one of the many cases. It's one of the most recent ones that took a very hard look at the equal terms provision, and they put a little gloss on it. If a land use regulation treats religious uses or institutions on less than equal terms with non-religious assemblies or institutions that are no less harmful to the governmental objectives in enacting the regulation, that regulation without more fails under RULEPA. And what they mean by that is, in our case, we're dealing with an open space zone. So the issue is, when you look at the zoning code and you look at the conditionally permitted uses there, what are the impacts of those uses on the county's open space objectives, as stated in the zoning ordinance, as compared to what the impacts of this project would be on those uses? And we think it is, I always hesitate to overstate matters like this, but we do think it's pretty much beyond question that there are a number of conditionally permitted uses in the county zoning ordinance that are conditionally permitted in the open space zone that have the potential, and they're actual examples of projects that are far more impactful on the county's open space objectives than this project. Some of them include, and the ones we're going to primarily talk about, are colleges and universities, which is actually a component of this project, coincidentally, government buildings, correctional institutions, campus, and retreats. Now, I want to emphasize something because I've noticed in the emails and letters and discussions there's been some confusion about this. It wouldn't matter if we could show you a single example of a project that's actually been built that was more impactful. I think it's clear just on its face, or we think it's clear, that obviously a college or university could well consume far more space than this project does, and could have many more buildings, much more intensity, use far more open space, and otherwise be far more impactful. The same is true with respect to a government building or a complex of government buildings. The same is true with an extensive campus or retreat. The same is true in connection with a correctional institution. These are often major projects that significantly impact the areas around them. We think this project is not all that impactful and actually is going to enhance the aesthetic of the Tehera-Rihata Valley. That's the basics. I mean, that's the law. That's our basic argument. But let's look at a few examples. I think that will help to highlight really here why it is that RULEPA does apply and why it is that these facilities really are going to be less impactful, or certainly no more impactful than uses on the ground in the county right now in open space zones. And by the way, Dan's already talked about this, but just note the first bullet point with respect to what the open space objectives are. Conservation of renewable and non-renewable natural resources, preservation and enhancement of environmental quality, and the retention of the maximum number of land use options while allowing reasonable and compatible uses on open lands. And then in the general plan, they speak to aesthetic, recreational, and safety purposes as reasons to be preserving or looking closely at uses of open space. And as I just said, the uses at the bottom there are all conditionally permitted. One more point before I get to the examples. If you look at the uses I'm about to talk about, or you just think about the uses that go on in colleges and universities and government buildings, in particular in camps and retreats, they're very similar to most of the uses that comprise the church and the CHF facilities. They all involve learning experiences. They usually involve classrooms of one sort or another, lectures, events, recreational opportunities, social gatherings, entertainment. All those things are equally present in the uses that are conditionally permitted and the proposed Cornerstone Community Church and CHF facilities. So in terms of assembly, we have a coincidence between these various uses. Here's some examples. The first is the Reagan Presidential Library, which is actually located, as you know, very close to the project site to the south. The zoning is exactly the same as this site, OS 40. They have approximately 400,000 annual visitors a year. In fact, in 2006, I believe they had 440,000 annual visitors. They have 241,000 square feet of improvements, which is substantially more than proposed for this project. And you can see, and you're probably all familiar with the wide variety of uses and events that occur at the site, including up to 150 calendar days of special events a year. This is a high-intensity use. It's a wonderful use. It's been a great benefit to the community, but I don't see how anyone can say that this proposed project, at least the CHF and church facilities, are not less impactful than the impacts of the Reagan Presidential Library. And this was approved while it was designated open space, and it has been amended or modified several times since, as recently as 2003, to add the Air Force One Pavilion. Thomas Aquinas College is also entirely in open space. It's OS 60, also approved. Oh, I'm sorry, back on the Reagan Library. Just to dispel to comment on one comment that was made in an email or a letter. Someone stated that this was not an apt comparison because the federal government owns the Reagan Library and it's exempt from county land use laws. And I'm sure you know that's untrue. It's not owned by the federal government. It's not exempt from county land use laws, and it did in fact need a conditional use permit. The city characterized the use as a government building, which is a conditionally permitted use, and then did approve and then subsequently modify the CUP. All right, Thomas Aquinas. I went the wrong way. All right. Thomas Aquinas is on a 131-acre site, larger site than the Cornerstone site. It's zoned open space, approved by CUP. The campus includes 20 buildings. Recently, a 135-foot high chapel and tower was constructed on the property. They also have athletic fields. They also have religious worship. They also have public lectures and events. They also have classes. They also have athletic gatherings, just like the proposed project. While Mr. Clement made a comment that some of these uses were approved by CUP before the property was designated open space, I'm not aware that that's the case for any of these. I don't think it's the case for Thomas Aquinas, but I would also remind you that every one of these uses I'm showing you, whenever they were originally approved, they have all been subject to numerous modifications that clearly occurred after the property was entirely or whatever portion open space it is. In fact, all of them have had modifications in recent years to add significant new improvements to their sites. The Todd Road Jail, I apologize, we didn't include this in your package because we hadn't been able to obtain all the information on it before we submitted the revised application. Correctional facilities, as I said, are conditionally permitted uses in the open space zone, and this is the latest example in the county, in the open space zone, it's OS 80, of a correctional facility. 852,000 square feet of improvements, 10 buildings, a very large water treatment plant, offices, vocational and educational facilities, food and laundry facilities, hundreds of parking spaces. This is a very significant use. And again, it's hard to, I don't see how anyone can reasonably say that this proposed project would have greater or even close to equal impact on the environment that this facility does, which is conditionally permitted in the OS zone. Just a couple more if I can get this to move, which it's not. There we go. Last two, Brandeis Barden campus of the American Jewish University. This is a camp and retreat. It's on a huge site, 3,000 acres, many buildings, meetings, conferences, education, multi-day events, residential dormitories, just a whole panoply of uses and buildings and structures over a much larger area than the proposed project, and this property is partially zoned open space. And then finally, the Thatcher School. This is a high school, which actually isn't even conditionally permitted in the open space zone, but I think they got a CUP before that happened. Again, many buildings, housing units, many recent improvements added, and certainly at least equally impactful, if not more, on the open space objectives of the county than this project. There are probably many more examples than this. I didn't want to sit here and give you 100. I think we tried to pick a few prominent ones where we rather starkly show and frame the issues that we're talking about here today. And again, you can compare all those uses you just saw with the proposed campus uses. Far less square footage overall, smaller than any of the other sites, although I think equal with the Reagan Library and smaller than all the others. A real focus here on green, which I'm not sure is the case with the others, because the concept of green development is a fairly recent innovation. The letters that you received and the comments we've read in the newspapers contain a few comments that we thought it was important to briefly address, again, to dispel some confusion here. And the first relates to the question that Commissioner Educas, am I pronouncing that correctly, stated, which is, could you seek a zone change? Could you seek a general plan amendment? I suppose the answer theoretically is yes to that, but I think the important answer to it is it's not necessary to do that because of the application of RULEPA here. I think though some have assumed that that is required, and the comment has been made, well, why doesn't SOAR apply, and why doesn't there have to be a vote of the people for this project? And the reason is that SOAR only applies to general plan amendments, as you know, when you want to, in this case, change the open space designation to another designation. We are not seeking to amend the general plan to change the general plan land use designation, nor are we seeking a rezoning to change the zoning designation, because with the application of RULEPA, which is intended to level the playing field so that religious uses are treated in the same manner the similar secular uses that the church facilities and the CHF facilities are similar and no more impactful than the projects I've just shown you or the uses I just talked about, and so therefore no general plan amendment or zone change is required here. Similarly, comments have been made, well, doesn't the Greenbelt resolution come into play with respect to this project? And again, the answer is clearly no. The Greenbelt resolution was intended as I heard one county official state the other day, as kind of a handshake agreement, not for any of the participating cities to expand their spheres of influence or annex property that's in the valley. We are not seeking an expansion of any city sphere of influence, and we're not seeking to annex the property into any of the participating cities. We have come to the county in whose jurisdiction this land is located and are simply asking today for a determination that you will go ahead and process the application in its entirety and allow this project to ultimately be considered on its merits. And I want to highlight that. No one has actually said that yet. There will be a full airing if you decide, as I think you should, that RULEPA does apply here and the city is bound to process the application. That's not approving the project. We still have to go through the full normal process. I'm sure Mr. Clement's correct that ultimately there's going to be an environmental impact report. We've already prepared about 2/3 of it, so and given it to the county in terms of underlying technical reports that they will then use to prepare it. But there's going to be a full process here. We're just asking to have a process. That's all this is about today. Third bullet point, there was some discussion in the letters and emails that makes it sound like there is no development permitted in open space areas. I think just given the examples I've shown you, we all understand that's not the case. And in truth, very significant development is currently allowed and has occurred in the open space area. This is actually a low-intensity development that is very respectful of its surrounding, of the surrounding area. And as I said at the beginning, Cornerstone is seeking equal treatment here, not special treatment. That's why RULEPA exists, to make sure that there is equal treatment. There is no intent in RULEPA to provide special treatment, and that's all we're seeking today. And we're not seeking an exemption or waiver, just to level the playing field, to have a chance for you, and ultimately, I'm sure, the Board of Supervisors to consider the merits of this project. And finally, there was a letter that you received just, I don't know, I think in the last 2 days from the city of Moore Park. And surprisingly, in that letter, the city takes the position that RULEPA does not apply. And they state that it doesn't apply by comparing the college that's proposed as part of this project with the other components of the project, the church, and pointing out that the college will generate a lot less traffic than the church. And for many reasons, that is not, I want to be fair about this, but it is a highly unpersuasive claim to make for a whole bunch of reasons. First, as I've already said, the issue isn't to compare any specific project of one site that's proposed or built to another one. The issue is to look at the code and to know what could occur given that a use is conditionally permitted. So it's obvious a college or university could be a very extensive development. Whether it is for this project, which it's not, I acknowledge it is a low-impact use, and we appreciate the city acknowledging that. But it doesn't matter what this specific college is. It's a matter that colleges can be very big, very intense, lots of improvements, lots of square space, lots of square footage that could be, and likely would be if it was an extensive campus, far more impactful to your open space objectives. Second, traffic concerns are not an open space objective. If you read the zoning code, there's nothing in there about an objective of the open space being to control traffic. It's about conserving open space. It's about having development that's compatible with open space and that doesn't remove recreational opportunities and increase safety risk to people and doesn't detract aesthetically from the existing environment. And we don't think any of those things are the case here, by the way. So we don't think that that point is well taken. We're surprised that the city would make that comment, and we hope that upon further reflection, as they learn more about how RULEPA works, they will understand that their comment is simply not well taken. I think with that, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to introduce to you, unless you have questions, but after you ask any questions you have, I'm then going to introduce Dave Phillips, the founder and president of the Children's Hunger Fund, to tell you a little bit more about that entity, which I think is important for you to understand that it is religious-based and just to have a sense for what they're all about. So thank you very much for your time.
Commissioner Molitor?
Thank you for a very complete presentation, Mr. Rubens. Just a couple questions. RULEPA was passed in 2000, you said.
Yes.
Are any of, and almost all the examples that you gave, you know, the Reagan Presidential Library, except I'm not sure about the Todd Jail, were all approved prior to that. That's correct?
Not exactly.
Okay, what projects has the planning department approved after 2000 in open space that you feel could be compared to this project?
Well, again, I just want to emphasize the point, then I will answer your question. It really wouldn't matter what if nothing had been approved. It really wouldn't matter. The issue, the central issue, is that the zoning ordinance does conditionally permit those uses, and that they are or could be far more impactful than the proposed uses here. We cited these examples just to let you see more visually and viscerally that this is actually happening, but it wouldn't really matter whether there was any example we could give you. But having said that, Todd Road Jail, I believe, was approved after 2000. The other uses were originally approved before 2000, but I believe every single one of them has been modified, in some cases multiple times, since 2000. Reagan Library, the Air Force One Pavilion, which added, 60,000 square feet of improvements and significantly increased the number of private events and other uses. That occurred in 2003. The Thomas Aquinas College.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure.
I was busy reacting to, I believe, an inaccurate statement you made and didn't hear what you said after that.
Sure, and I'd be happy to-
Start again from, please.
Yeah.
From when you said the Todd Road Jail was approved after 2000. Those points that you made after.
Okay.
Thank you.
The Reagan Library was approved originally, the conditional use permit was approved before the year 2000, but it has been modified after 2000 to substantially expand the square footage of the facility, to substantially increase the number of events, to allow uses that previously weren't permitted. That happened in 2003. I believe Thomas Aquinas College's CUP has also been amended since 2000, and I think this is in our materials.
Just so you're aware, and I'll caution you here.
Sure.
There are commissioners who were sitting here for all of those things.
Sure.
So instead of getting yourself in trouble with talking about, I think the point you're trying to make, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you are trying to make the equivalency argument about the use. But if I were you, I would leave it there,
Right.
because you're not answering the question that is being posed.
Maybe you could ask the question again, and I apologize. I thought I was.
First, let's go back to Commissioner Molitor.
I think my question had to do with the fact that have there been any projects, I was really trying to get at a point. My first question was whether have there been any projects themselves approved after 2000? And then, and you're giving me examples of amendments to projects. That's fine, but if we're going to say that, or if you're asking us to say that, according to our RULEPA, we have to approve this because of other projects. If that's what you're trying to say, I'm not following that.
And I'm not trying to say that, and let me back up, and I apologize if I'm not being clear. First, we're not asking you to approve the project today. Again, we're just asking for a determination that the project application will be processed.
Excuse me a second, but you're giving me examples in your presentation about these other projects.
Yes.
And I can't ignore that. That's why my question is
Sure.
that.
The reason I'm giving you examples of actual projects on the ground is to try and illustrate what it is your zoning ordinance permits right now. So right now, your zoning ordinance conditionally permits government buildings, colleges and universities, correctional institutions, and camps and retreats. With a conditional use permit, those uses are all allowed. And the conceptual point I was making before I even showed you any of the projects was that those uses can obviously be more impactful to open space objectives than the proposed church and CHF facilities here. A college and university can be a very extensive development. Government building or a complex of government buildings can be a very extensive development. Correctional institution can be a very extensive development. So just conceptually, I think that's the case, and I think that's a reasonable thing to say. The reason I then showed you the examples was to say, well, not only conceptually is it the case that these kinds of developments that are conditionally permitted already, that they can be very significant, but here's actual examples of ones that have been built, just to show you that they are extensive, that they do have impacts, that they do involve a lot of square footage, that they do consume open space, that they do have a lot of the same kinds of assembly uses that the proposed facilities here have, and yet, those uses are all conditionally permitted, but churches and other religious structures that can have far less impact are not. And that is what RULEPA is designed to remedy, to not allow that to happen. So that if a city or a county says, look, we're going to allow all these uses or conditionally permit them, even though they have big impacts on open space, but the county says the church uses just aren't permitted, even though they could be far less impactful, that's not fair.
Okay. So what you're saying is the ordinance is unconstitutional.
I'm saying the ordinance violates RULEPA. I don't know if that's a constitutional issue or not, but it does violate RULEPA, a federal statute. And it may be, they're still developing the case law. I'll sound like a lawyer for 10 seconds, I apologize. All the cases talk about just whether you violate the equal terms provision or not, or a county or city does. I think it's still unclear as to whether the equal terms provision rises to a constitutional level. Some people think it does. Some people think it doesn't. But it is a federal statute.
Thank you for that clarification, and that helps me a little more. My other question is, are all charitable organizations religious?
No.
So because something is charitable, and I'm referring to the CHF, because that's charitable doesn't mean it's religious. You're saying it's religious, and therefore it should be allowed under RULEPA. Is that what you said?
Yes, as Mr. Phillips will tell you, CHF is a compassion ministry. They are quite firmly religious based. That is the essence of what they do, and it's mixed into everything that they do. Is it religious based because he says it is, or is it religious based because of what they're doing? It's religious based because of what they're doing, and why don't I? Excuse me, what they're doing is charity. I'm just trying to understand this. I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm trying to understand charitable and religious as far as this. And that's a very fair question. May I ask this of you? Could I defer that and let Mr. Phillips answer? Because I think he can give a much better answer than me. Thank you, Chair. That's all I have.
Commissioner Dukas.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
You said look at the code. Could you, or do we have in our packet, and I just don't remember where it is, the actual text of, is it RULEPA? Is that what we're agreeing to call it?
The Religious Land Use and
Yes,
Institutionalized Persons Act.
But the nice little acronym, like we say CEQA instead of the California Environmental Quality.
It's commonly known as RULEPA.
RULEPA. Do you have the actual text in your presentation materials?
I did have the equal terms provision, and it is in the package you received. Would you like me to rewind to it?
What I did also, and I forgot to disclose, is I went on to I just Googled RULEPA and looked at the background and when it became law in 2000, and looked at a site called the Beckett Fund. Are you familiar with that? BeckettFund.org. Yes. And looked at the actual text to just inform myself, because this is fairly recent for us. We've had just one other project before us that made the same claim. And I was wondering, do we have the actual text? Because you cautioned us, look at the code, and I thought, okay, look at the code, look at the text.
There's the text of the equal terms provision. It's in the middle bullet point. It's in blue. And that's the same language that Mr. Clement showed you.
It's also quoted in the staff report. Dan Clement put it and quoted the extensive portion of the equal terms provision in there.
Okay.
And that is essentially the same thing.
And do we have also the open space code and how it came to be that we have actual things that are allowed, and we've had experience with things that are not allowed in open space?
I defer that question to the planning director, who has more of a history on that provision in the non-coastal zoning ordinance.
Oops.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
What I missed.
Do you want to take a vote now?
I think someone just leaned against the switch.
That's one interpretation.
Could we discuss? I'll get you for that. Do we actually have the open space code and what's allowed and what's not allowed, and some explanation of how that came to be and how it relates to the purpose, actualizing the purpose of the open space zone, which seems to be at issue here too?
Yeah, we did quite a bit of research when the application first was submitted, and the open space element in the open space zoning designation was adopted in 1970. The majority of the uses that are currently allowed in the open space zone date back to the original adoption of the open space element and the adoption of that zoning district. Governmental buildings such as the Ronald Reagan Library, that went back to I believe is the late 70s. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of
Mr. Clement, just the Ronald Reagan Library is owned by a private foundation. So, from my perspective, the only governmental building we're talking about at this point would be the Todd Road Jail. I don't want to mix issues here, but a presidential library is not a governmental building, at least to my awareness. And
okay, to clarify why
Operated under the auspices of the Smithsonian and the National Library. Okay, but it's not an act, correct. So it's like a joint use kind of concept, if you will.
Right.
But the ownership is correct, it's not.
To clarify, the reason why I'm defining it as a governmental building was because in 1988, the planning director at the time made an equivalency determination that the Ronald Reagan Library, because it was run by the National Archives and Records Administration, does function as a governmental building and is equivalent to governmental buildings as defined by the code at that point in time. So you might disagree with that determination, but that's why I define it in those terms. But getting back to your original question, the majority of the uses in the code that are currently allowed date back to the original adoption of the open space element. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of information in the public record to provide us guidance as to what was the rationale for adopting certain uses as being conditionally permitted in the open space zone as compared to others. There was nothing on educational institutions such as colleges and universities. There was nothing on governmental buildings, so on and so forth. And even the community centers for farm workers and nonprofit farm worker organizations, there's really no rationale in the staff report, in the public record, for why that use was allowed in the open space zone. So unfortunately, I can't give you a whole lot of guidance, and the public record doesn't provide us with much guidance either.
Oh, and what about the Todd Road Jail?
Okay, yeah, that was a good question, and I might as well address the uses that have been permitted, with the exception of, actually, all of the examples cited by Mr. Rubens were permitted prior to the adoption of RULEPA. However, a number of them have been modified since RULEPA was passed into law. The Todd Road Jail was approved in 1992 as a governmental building. So once again, that goes back to the original adoption of the open space element. And yeah, that's why it's allowed out there. And the Todd Road Jail was modified as recently as 2001 as a creek stabilization project, but it really had no bearing on the expansion of the jail or a change in use or anything of that nature.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just one, I'm sorry, if there's other questions, I was going to have one thing though.
Commissioner Weissner?
No, I had no question, just because I want to give opposing counsel equal time on your, so, no, it's just, I do want to make disclosure for the Children Hunter Fund. There was a mission fair at our church on Sunday, and they did participate in it, and I did receive information on that. I failed to disclose that earlier. I didn't know there'd be testimony on that. It had nothing to relate to what's before us today.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
No, I think staff has just answered the question or made the comments as relates to when these facilities are used as examples were originally permitted. So I don't think I have anything further to say on that. They all preceded, obviously.
I have no questions.
Just two things. One, I apologize. I actually thought the Todd Road Jail had been approved after 2000. That was my mistake. I don't think that it's relevant when these uses were approved. I think what's relevant is that they are conditionally permitted, but I apologize. And then second, I told you at the beginning, I thought that the big issue were these RULEPA issues. I apparently thought that so much I actually forgot to even talk about the appeal issue. So let me just say briefly that I think reasonable minds can differ as to whether or not the CHF facilities are, in particular, a nonprofit farm community organization, if that's the term. I think we made persuasive arguments that it could be treated equivalently to that. I don't find particularly persuasive the arguments that planning staff have made, but you know what? Reasonable minds can differ on this point, and I'm not going to say that it's unreasonable for the staff to come out where they did, although I think our position is equally tenable. But I guess what I want to leave you with is that issue really doesn't matter if the commission determines that pursuant to RULEPA, the CHF facilities are nonetheless conditionally permitted uses. So with that, thank you for your time, and I'd like to introduce Mr. Phillips. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Jack, I want to give you the opportunity in your rebuttal because this is where I'm going to go on the CHF one specifically. We have been very judicious and expeditious on guarding our agricultural resources in this county, up to the point of limiting the uses by people to expand on their agricultural properties beyond the scope of really what relates to the, for lack of a better term, history of our agriculture in our community. So what I'm going to be looking for you is an appropriate nexus between what CHF does and that concept in an open space, because in my mind, that's the decision I've got to make. So you don't need to answer now. I want you to think on that for a little bit. And then if you want to follow up a little bit later, we can certainly go through that.
For clarification, are you talking about in terms of the appeal issue, the equivalency
Correct.
issue?
Correct.
Not the RULEPA issue, though?
Correct. Right, just the equivalency issue, because just so you give you a little background, we try to protect our agriculture community to the point of how do we keep them economically viable and sustainable given the terms and conditions, but we've always had a very strong nexus that it's got to be agriculture tied to what they do. Greenhouses specifically. They produce flowers instead of strawberry. It's still agriculture as far as we're concerned. So I'm going to be looking for that kind of a nexus to help me make my decision.
On the appeal issue?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Dave Phillips, President and Founder of Children's Hunger Fund. And this morning, I'd like to start with some clarity just on who we are as an organization. And I think as a starting point, I'd like to address the Commissioner's question on the fact that we are a religious nonprofit organization. When we incorporated back in December of 1991, we sought incorporation with the state of California as a religious nonprofit under a 501c3 status. So the public record would be, if you were to see that document, it would list right on the top of the document that we are a religious organization. So therefore, we deem ourselves religious not based on what we do or the services that we provide, but it goes back to our very the founding days of starting the organization and our very clear mission in what we wanted to accomplish at the start. And I think we could probably be better classified, if you would, as a parachurch organization. And by definition, what that means is that we exist really solely to support the work of the church. And that is who we define ourselves at. You would see in our mission statement that we exist to assist children in need and to provide program services to children that are impacted by hunger and poverty-related issues. The method and the purpose and how we do that, everything that we do is designed to be a conduit for change and for assistance through churches that are at work in low-income areas here locally, regionally, across the United States, and on a global basis. We accomplish our mission by training and equipping church and community leaders to care for the poor using relational strategies which focus on the home delivery of food. So by way of understanding who we are, a major component of our organization is this aspect of training and providing resources to church leaders and to volunteers in those churches that are equipped to go into the homes of the poor and to build relationships with them. And our ultimate mission is to really improve the quality of life of those children and families that we serve in an effort to restore hope and to see their lives changed and bettered so that they can really reach their full potential and to become all that God created them to be. So I think that is a much better understanding of who we are as an organization. I want to also address one of the comments that was made in the opening statement by Mr. Clemens, and I did appreciate what was shared there, but I also want to clarify maybe what some of you have heard and read in the newspapers. Children's Hunger Fund should not be thought of as a industrial warehouse organization or a food storage organization or a food bank. That is not what we are, and that is not what we're about. Clearly, if you were to come and see Children's Hunger Fund in our facilities in Pacoima, what you would see is an active ministry of committed volunteers and staff that have had a measurable effect on restoring hope in the lives of children and families that we serve. And that's a major component of who we are. I also want to address the comment that was made that Children's Hunger Fund is an international organization. I saw in some of the letters questioning, why should a nonprofit like Children's Hunger Fund be allowed to come into open space when all they're doing is helping children in international locations somewhere around the world? Well, yes, that is a part of who we are, but it would not be a true statement to say that the vast majority of our product and our programs impact children internationally on a global basis. If you were to look at the volume of food that we distribute on an annual basis, the vast majority of that food impacts families in Southern California. Probably on average between 60 and 70% of all the food volume that we distribute is impacting families in the Southern California area. Each week through our programs in Pacoima, we're serving a network of churches that are providing food to more than 8,000 families on a weekly basis. Some of those families are right here in Ventura County. So it would not be a fair representation of Children's Hunger Fund to say that we're purely global in our distribution. While that is a component of what we do, there is a major local emphasis to our programs. And to give you some background, we have been providing program services to the poor in Ventura County going back to 1994. We got involved in the area actually after the Northridge earthquake, and there were some families that were able to help in the south portions of Ventura County, but then we began working with churches in the county on an ongoing basis after that. Our largest distribution programs in the county actually took place last year in 2007 between February and April, and that was specifically in response to the needs of the farm workers that were impacted by the freeze that winter. During that time, we partnered with a group of churches that come under the umbrella name of Action, and we partnered with them on 7 large distributions of food that focused again on farm workers and their families that were negatively impacted by the freeze. The largest distributions were in an area known as La Colonia. We also impacted families that reside in areas known as Nyland Acres, Oxnard, El Rio, and Fillmore. Through those 7 distributions, an estimated 7,475 people were served during that time frame. There were more than 15,000 food boxes that were prepared, and Children's Hunger Fund was the largest food supplier for those distributions. So again, I just want to make it clear that there's a very strong local component to what we do here in the county. And I think one of the things that we're most excited about with this project, again, just so everyone understands, we're a separate organization from Cornerstone Church. We've been invited in to their project and to be a part of their master plan. But what excites us is the opportunity to expand our impact in helping the residents of Ventura County. And one of the things that we like about the location is that it would allow us to draw in churches that are in the northern part of the county, up into Oxnard, Ventura, and begin to do more program services related to those low-income families that currently aren't being served. And what we would anticipate happening over the next 3 to 4 years is that we would imagine that we'd be able to expand our program services in the county that would touch upwards of 1,500 families a week through home delivery of food, should we go forward with this project. I also want to talk a little bit about how we want to use the property. Again, I think it was already well articulated by Jack Rubens in his comments that there's going to be multiple uses of the property should we go forward with the building program. And yes, there will be a warehouse component to it, but the vast majority of our programs relate to training and equipping leaders to engage the poor and to care more about the poor through compassionate ministry. And part of that would be desiring to have a facility there to house our Compassion Institute. The Compassion Institute is the training component that we are involved in on a regular basis. Currently, we have that facility in Pacoima, and we have it in other parts of the United States, where we're able to train hundreds of leaders and volunteers in churches in this relational approach to reaching out and caring for the poor. There would also be a strong educational component, and part of the vision that I'm most excited about is the potential there to develop an educational center. And this center would really focus on causing the facilities to become a destination point for school groups to come, in a sense, in a field trip experience. We would be targeting the public and private schools. We want to provide additional opportunities for high schoolers that need to serve their community service hours. We want to reach out to homeschool networks, to youth organizations and youth groups, and create an environment where these groups of children and youth could come and walk through an interactive educational center where they become educated on the reality of childhood hunger. And as we take them through that process, we also want to communicate to them our response to the reality of poverty and hunger in the world. And the focus of that response will be on compassion, in responding in a compassionate way to the needs of the poor, and on service, and actively getting involved in a service capacity to reaching the needs of these children that are less fortunate than ourselves. And as they conclude the educational portion of their visit, they would then move into a warehouse setting where they would take part in a service project together as a team, which could involve assembling food packs, which we do on a weekly basis. It could involve creation of hygiene packs or school packs, a variety of items that are produced that we give out to our trained network of churches that will use those in home delivery. So again, there is a very, very strong educational component to what we're doing. I think it's also already been explained that we envision this facility being a low-impact project in the open space area. And that's an issue that I'm very sensitive to, and I know that Cornerstone has tried to be very sensitive to, and I think they have gone above and beyond to try to make the facilities on this site as low impact as is feasible. And part of that, I think, was communicated in the amount of truck traffic. I know that's one of the concerns you have as a commission, is what kind of truck traffic and people traffic is going to be on the site. The truck traffic will be limited to 3, maybe 4 truckloads a day. Most of that truck activity would be our own trucks that go in and off the site. We do have 2 large trucks that go up and down the West Coast, receiving product donations from corporations and bringing them to the facility. So there will be that kind of minimal activity. Also, the visitors to the facility, they'll primarily be children and families that are coming to our site for volunteer purposes. And the hours of those opportunities will be pretty much between the hours of 10 and 2 p.m. During the week, and then also on Saturdays. And those are times that, again, would avoid the peak traffic times, which I know is one of your concerns. And again, that I think this program and the development of the educational component can all be done in a way that would create minimal impact on the community in terms of the traffic concerns. So as I kind of lay this out, I just want to address the fact that we are very active in the local community in terms of the county. And I want to go on record as saying that I'm not trying to argue here that we are a nonprofit agricultural organization. That's not who we are. But I would argue that our program services are similar to those types of organizations, and that we have been reaching out to residents that are in the farm community that have definite needs that we've addressed. And I would only envision that those needs would be even more addressed in the future as we expand into the county. And I would just want to clarify again another comment that Mr. Clement said, that there is much more than just the possibility that some of the food and some of the services would impact this county in the future. It is not a possibility. It is part of our vision plan to expand our program services in this county. We want to engage the churches that are in this area and challenge them and encourage them to get more involved in caring for the poor. And I know I could speak for Francis Chan, the pastor of Cornerstone Community, who's not able to be here today because he's out of the country. But I know he shares his heart on this issue. And that is, both he and I were residents of this county, and we both have a heart and a love for the people of this county. And we firmly believe that this project, whether you look at the college component, the church component, or the CHF component, all 3 of these components will bring inherent good to the community for years to come. It's our passion and it's our desire to continue to pour into the lives of the people of this county. And for us, that's a heart issue. We care deeply about the hearts of the individuals in our county. We want to be a part of impacting lives, not just on a global basis, but right here in our home, in our own backyard, in a positive way that would only have lasting benefits to this community. So with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity to share.
If I may, I would caution people, please don't do that. Okay? This is a public hearing, and I appreciate the emotion in this room, but applause is really inappropriate for what we're talking about right now. Okay? Thank you. Commissioner Weissner.
Mr. Phillips, real quick. Your Pacoima facility, is it an open space, industrial? What kind of zoning does it exist in right now?
Our current facility?
Correct.
We currently have 2 facilities. Our headquarters are in Pacoima in the San Fernando Valley, and we lease about 40,000 square feet of space in an industrial complex. We have a second facility in the south side of Chicago, which is a single-standing 33,000 square foot building as well that has both programs have large volunteer components to them where food assembly and other projects take place.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips.
Commissioner Rodriguez. Yeah, following up on that theme, Mr. Phillips. Your present facility then is, you said, a little over 40,000 square feet that are leased.
Correct.
And you butt up against Whitman Airport there.
That's correct.
And looking at And looking at an aerial view of the location last night, I noticed an awful lot of what appear to be tractor trailers and a lot of docking space for vehicles. You, I assume, use part of that docking space, and some of those vehicles, obviously,
We do.
presumably belong to you.
Yeah. I believe that our facility has 3 docking spaces on the site. We do have 2 53-foot. We have 2 tractor trailer rigs, and we have 2 refrigerated 53-foot trailers, and I believe we have 2 dry box trailers that would be on that site.
Okay. What is your? You obviously are distributing out of 2 facilities, primary facilities here in California and in Chicago. So if I were to ask you, what is your annual tonnage of distribution? Would you be giving me numerical numbers as it relates to California or total, or do you break it down?
I could give you. I didn't come prepared with those numbers. I would say on an annualized basis, we probably would move 300 plus truckloads of product. Now, if you were to do tonnage on that could be upwards of 10 million pounds of product. Now, that would be product that would be moved not only regionally around the United States, but on an international basis. Even with those large volumes, I don't want to create a false impression in your mind that there's going to be 300 plus truckloads flowing through any of our warehouses. The vast majority of the product we never touch. And I would give you an example on an international basis. If we had Gerber's Baby Food give us a semi-loaded baby food in Arkansas, we would ship that entire truckload directly from their warehouse to an international field location. Oftentimes, even on the local distribution, product, rather than coming into our warehouse, may go directly to other sites, other church locations where there's large distribution scheduled. So while there is significant activity in terms of food handling, storage, and product movement, there wouldn't be one particular facility that we own and operate that would exceed the type of operations that we've talked about in our presentation today.
Okay. Well, my comments and my concerns obviously relate to this facility and obviously the traffic that's generated from it as it relates to Southern California. You made a comment that 60 to 70% of your distribution goes throughout Southern California, and that's specifically what I was trying to address or trying to get information on. So you can't give me that kind of information today.
The amount of product that would be distributed in Southern California?
Yeah.
Probably 6 million pounds.
Okay.
On an annualized basis.
Okay. What percentage of that impacts Ventura County directly in the way of distribution? You used that as part of your presentation,
Right.
I think.
I would say we have churches that are in Ventura County that pick up on a weekly basis. Our largest distributing partner is an organization called Jubilee Church in Camarillo. They service a network of churches in the area. If I had to wager a guess, we're probably talking 20 to 30,000 pounds of food a week that are going into Ventura County currently. But I would also, again, just comment on the fact that Ventura County has, while we've done distributions here, it becomes an even greater primary area of emphasis for us, and that's why we want to be headquartered in the county, because it allows for great expansion of our services to the residents, particularly in some of the needier pockets. If you look at Ventura Oxnard as an example, that we currently aren't able to serve as well because of the distance from Pacoima.
Okay. So traffic, I guess the issue of traffic or truck trips, obviously there's pickups that are occurring and you're not delivering, you're receiving, bringing product in, and then vehicles, to some quantity of vehicles, are coming to the present site for distribution, to pick up for distribution purposes.
That is correct. The churches or agencies that we work with in Ventura County would come to the site to pick up their product as a general rule. So there would be smaller activity of vehicles, whether it be pickup trucks or van load quantities that would come to the site. Again, those distributions would primarily be midweek between the hours of 10 and 2, which would mirror to a large degree what we're doing now in our Pacoima program.
And so the proposed plan would double or more than double your current occupation, your occupied space, lease space in Pacoima, from
Correct.
40+ thousand to about 94,000, as I recall.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Dukas?
What airports do you use to ship out of internationally when you make these food packs?
We do very little shipping via air freight. It's almost undone via ocean freight. So we'd be shipping out of the ports, Long Beach, San Pedro, primarily here on the West Coast.
Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Molitor?
Thank you for clarifying my question on the religious charitable. Your first bullet up there does that. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
You did state, and I quote, that you're a separate organization from Cornerstone Church.
Correct.
So you're really a separate entity from the church itself.
That's correct.
And like Commissioner Weissner, I'm still uncomfortable with the nexus or the link between what you do, which is wonderful. It's God's work what you're doing. There's no question there. But I have to decide about the appeal, how that affects the land use of Ventura County. So that's going on in my head. And lastly, if we deny the appeal for your facility, what would you do? I mean, besides be very angry at us. But I mean, do you have a plan B that you were thinking of?
Yeah. As it relates to the Children's Hunger Fund facility.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, just a couple of comments there. I think, first of all, the decision you have to make on the appeal, I don't know. I'm not in a position to argue that any further. I can only state to you what our program services have been and what we anticipate them to do and to be in the future. And I leave that to you to determine if it fits or not. In terms of our Plan B, there would be 2 steps. The first would be, I think, consistent to what Council has said here, Jack Rubens, that Cornerstone's position as well as CHF's position is that the primary argument that we're putting forth is the RULEPA argument. And that would be Plan B for us. If we go down this road and things don't transpire as we would hope, we are still in a situation where we need to expand our facilities. And I would say where we would go next would really depend on what doors God opened up to us. And it would become an issue of economics. One of the reasons that this project is so appealing to us is because of Cornerstone's generosity. They have offered us to come in. We are not paying for the land. They've gone above and beyond what would be even expected to invite us into this project. If that opportunity goes away, then quite honestly, we would be looking to have our headquarters somewhere along the 118 corridor. That doesn't necessarily mean that we would land in Ventura County. I would say there's probably a greater likelihood that we would establish headquarters in an existing building, probably somewhere on the east end of the San Fernando Valley, and combine our services that already exist, which quite frankly would minimize our opportunity to reach the northern points of Ventura County. Not to put any pressure on you, but that would be the reality, that we would have to look for the opportunity as they would come to us and make an economic decision.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Thank you.
I neglected to do one thing. If you would give me 30 seconds. There are a great number of people who showed up today who are not asking to speak because they want to keep the presentation manageable, but they did show up to support Cornerstone and CHF today. And just so you know that they're here, could you, in the audience, raise your hands if you're here in support of Cornerstone or the CHF? Just so you know. Thanks.
We have Rick Parkinson. That was well done. Thank you. Rick?
Oh, I was just on the list in case you had questions for me. I'm with the church, but I have nothing more to add. I think that you've got what you need.
Are there questions for Mr. Parkinson? Okay. Sharon Noel?
Actually, my card inadvertently got processed. I'm opposed to the bill.
Then,
Should I speak opposed to it?
absolutely. I'm down to my last 2 speaker cards, so.
Good morning. My name is Sharon Noel, and I live in Moore Park. I'm here to
If you
speak
could
in. Pardon?
state your address, please, for the
Oh,
record.
6131 Gabbert Road.
Thank you.
I'm here to protect the open space zoning element, the ordinance. The issue of the project going forward, I think, would set a very strong precedence, and I think in that regard, it will undermine the open space zoning and the element that's, I guess that's my main stance on the issue.
Questions from the commission? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chris Gates?
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Chris Gates. I'm an engineer and a business owner. I live in Moore Park at 4000 Hopi Court, which is immediately above Tierra Hada. I'm about a mile west of the proposed destruction of the Greenbelt, and so I have a real vested interest in this. But even more so, I mean, what with our current government situation that we have at the federal level with trillion-dollar bailouts and the lack of support for our government and special interests, I think all of us have to become more concerned with what goes on, especially in our own neighborhood, as is this particular end run that is being accomplished or trying to be accomplished. Please excuse me, I am not a lawyer. I don't have a slick presentation. I don't speak well in public, so if I step on somebody procedurally, feel free to slap me down. To that end, if we could return to Mr. Rubin's first slide, I think it would be useful if someone can do that for me. I don't quite know how to do that.
Which one?
The first slide. That's it right there. Yeah, they'll be fine. Thanks. What Cornerstone Church is proposing here is a magic trick. They're redirecting your attention to one side or another. Oh, it's for the children. Oh, we're going to put another religious institution here. From my house, I'm in easy walking distance of 3 different churches. This is about a religious issue. Not at all. The Open Spaces Act calls and directly addresses religious institutions as well as industrial institutions. We are trying, as people, to keep our open spaces green. We are trying to make ourselves not look like Pacoima. Has any of you been to White Manor Park? Have you been around that area? It's a horrible, horrible area. Okay? I wouldn't want to park my car there. All right? I understand why they want to move out of there, but I certainly wouldn't want their business in Pacoima here in our lovely community. What makes this special? When you drive over from the San Fernando Valley, let's say Chatsworth, tilt up after tilt up, and the ones that are not filming porn in, they've got some industrial business in that's having trucks running in and out of there. What part of Moore Park do we want to look that way? We already have industrial areas. They're tightly controlled. They could buy space in those, and they could accomplish this. One of the stated goals for this lovely fund to help the children, that's a redirect. What we're interested in here is keeping our green belts green. Not putting anything there. Industrial, religious, children's fund. It's a great goal. We're going to feed the children. I might take exception that we have 1.5 million children here in the United States, and they're shipping stuff out of San Pedro to go to other countries, but that's all redirect. The real issue here is, that's our green belt. Don't mess with our green belt. Put your industrial buildings wherever you want. The roads are geared for them. You're closer to freeways. You have loading docks. Mr. Rodriguez astutely observed that the Pacoima facility has 3 loading docks, and they're going to double their square footage, a little over double their square footage, but we're still only going to have 3 trucks a day go in and out. We're going to be doing all these massive increases in programs that they want to do, but we're still only going to have 3 trucks going out. Does anybody really believe that? 91,000 square feet for the CHF. That's huge. What are they going to be doing there? There's going to be trucks going in and out and a lot of extra traffic. Again, that's all redirect. We don't care what they're doing. We really don't. That is our green spot. It falls inside of what the Open Spaces Act already claims. We as voters in this county put this through years ago. We did it because we didn't trust our elected officials. And back then we were a lot more trusting. Today, we really don't trust elected officials. We're watching now. Okay, that's why I'm here today. That's why I'm taking time out of my business to be here to protest this. Why are they spending time and effort on the skills of Mr. Rubin, and he's got to be expensive, he's a good liar, to come here when they could be devoting that to, say, food for some of these children they're doing? Why are they devoting all this time and effort to do this in an area where it isn't wanted? Go to some place where it is. There's many industrial facilities just a couple of miles into Simi Valley there. There's the old Kmart building that's there, or all the industrial park behind it that has all the vacancies that could be used, that have loading docks, that are close to the freeways, that are used to this kind of traffic. Leave our green belts alone. Leave them alone. What makes us different than Pacoima? Thank you, gentlemen.
Any questions? Thank you. I have no more speaker cards. I have another speaker card. Could you please bring that up?
I apologize, I didn't turn this. My name is Jeff Shostrom. I live at 815 Tierra Rajada. It's exactly north of the proposed project. Now, I'm not questioning what these people are trying to do. I think, watching everybody come in here, and I see people hugging everybody, and, it's a loving thing. So I'm not questioning the people themselves and what they're trying to do. And the Children's Hunger Fund, I think that's a great charitable organization. But what I am questioning, though, is the way that this is going about. Brief history, we've been here since the 1970s, our family. And the zoning is very prohibitive, and we knew that buying the piece of property. And we accept that when you buy the piece of property. The church has come in, and I just heard recently that they said they closed the deal and actually purchased the property. But the Cavions have owned that and have been trying to do something with that property, that 138 acres, for some time. There was an attempt, meeting before the Simi City Council, to get it annexed to Simi so they'd get more favorable zoning. That was denied. That gets shot down, so it never did get to planning. That's the history behind that. It's been in escrow, with offers a couple times, and fallen out because nobody could get it. I think it's a 40-acre zone now, but nobody could get it more dense than that. They want to put condos. People have approached us on our 20 acres to see if we would partner with them in going to, high density. Can you put condos in your 5 acres down below and keep your house up above? And we weren't interested in doing that. We're interested in the open space. So I think the way the church is approaching this is offensive to me on one key element. They knew that there is restrictive zoning on this property when they went to purchase the property. And yet now they've gone ahead and purchased it and are now saying, if you don't let us do what we want, we will, I assume, take you to court on this RULEPA law and use the federal government to go after you. In the Planning Commission report, it was pointed out, just as this gentleman just said, that there is tremendous amount of commercial property available, and with the stock market doing what it's doing, probably more every day, where these type of gatherings could be held, where they could buy land and approve for this particular type of a church, a Bible college, all of these great things to do, but not in this particular setting. I worry about 3,000 cars parking lot and the amphitheaters and the traffic. We talk about the wildlife and the open space. And if you put the additional load that this is going to cause into Tierra Rajada, to me, it just seems that it's going to really impact what the counties and the cities, what the county and the cities have tried to do all along, and keep an open space buffer zone. 3,000 cars are a lot of cars. When we first moved here, you used to be able to count on two hands the number of cars that came down Tierra Rajada. that's my objection to this whole thing, that it seems that the church is coming in, buying the property, and then trying to force it down our throat with the RULEPA regulation. The CHF, to me, I think if it were making the application itself, I think you'd have a much different and a much easier time with upholding the planning's decision. It seems to me that what little I know about RULEPA, it has to do with worship and religious gatherings. And CHF does not seem to me to be, for religious worship. I know it's tied into the church, but it's an ancillary type of a use. The other thing I wanted to ask the council, on the Reagan Library, my reading of the Presidential Library Act is that the building and the properties revert and become federal property once they're constructed. I don't know if you know about this or not. I don't know if the others. The foundation runs the Reagan Library, but the property is federal land, I believe. Does anybody know if I'm correct or not?
What it is a joint use agreement between the federal government, particularly under the Smithsonian and Congressional Library. So as long as it's used as such, it is operated under the federal rules. That's why there's Secret Service, U.S. Treasury, all those issues are involved. If it should cease to be a federal library, presidential library, then it would revert back to the private foundation. So again, it's one of those joint use agreements that will go on in perpetuity, or at least as long as the federal government exists. So there seem to be some questions about that.
Yeah. Again, I just want to say, this is a great bunch of people. I see the warmth and the love in everybody. And I hope you can appreciate, I'm not some mean guy. I'm somebody who sits there and plays by the rules. And, we've got paintball down there. We've got other things going on that is, contrary to the rules, not enforced, and they let it go on. And I think we just have to play by the rules. There are other pieces of land, there's other pieces of property that they could purchase to do this. And I also don't think it's discrimination because, number one, of all the churches in the area, I think the county is more than supportive of religion. So much so that Cornerstone itself used I think Mesa Verde Middle School for worship services, Moore Park High School, and the Ventura Community College. So I don't think it can be said that the county of Ventura is against or discriminatory toward religious gatherings of any type. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Do you have any questions for me?
Commissioner Molotov? Commissioner Lucas?
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Rodriguez? Okay, thank you. At this point, I have no more speaker cards. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be coming back for rebuttal by the applicant. All right, thank you. 10 minutes. Mr. Rubens.
Well, first of all, we'd really like to thank you for giving us enough time to really fully air out these issues and appreciate your patience in listening and appreciate the questions that you asked, which I have done my best to answer. I really just want to close by summarizing what's on that slide, which I intentionally skipped in making the presentation earlier. A lot of the comments that were made by the public, in fact, one could argue maybe all of them, relate to the merits of this project. And we could have spent a lot of time, I could have spent all sorts of time telling you about how wonderful this project is, and I believe it. I think it is a terrific project. But that is simply not why we're here today. We're here today not to discuss whether the project's great or terrible or how many loading docks they're going to have. It's simply whether, well, here it is. Let's just look at the 4 points. Point 1 is that the development of conditionally permitted uses in the open space zone, which include colleges, government buildings, correctional institutions, is no less harmful to the county's open space land use objectives than the development of the church and the CHF facilities. We think that's unequivocal. 2, the types of assemblies that would occur at the church and the CHF facilities are indeed similar in nature to the types of assemblies that occur regularly at colleges and universities, in government buildings, and at camps and retreats. I think that's unequivocal. 3, that in fact we have actual examples of government buildings, colleges and universities and other schools that have in fact, on the ground, been developed in ways that have similar or greater impacts on those open space objectives, whether they were approved before RULEPA or after RULEPA. Not really the issue. The issue is that. And then finally, for those reasons, the church and the CHF facilities, under RULEPA, under federal law, a law that is designed to level the playing field for religious uses, that those facilities must be considered conditionally permitted uses in the open space zone within the context of RULEPA's equal terms provisions. That is the primary issue before you today, and we hope you'll agree with us. Regarding the appeal, which I just want to emphasize again to us is a very secondary issue here, although we did appeal it, and it is before you, and you do have to make a determination. Commissioner Weissner, I hope that the comments Mr. Phillips made, and he's going to come up in a moment to address one small comment that was raised. I hope that was the information you were looking for. I'm not sure what I can add to that. I think reasonable minds can differ on this issue. I think if the Commission wants to take an expansive role of equivalency, you could easily find that the CHF facilities are equivalent to one of the 2 or both of the conditionally permitted uses that we've set out. If you want to take a narrow view, you could go the other way. I don't think that's the case on the RULEPA issues, though. I don't think there are really 2 reasonable ways of looking at this. I think the issues are very clear-cut and the facts are very clear-cut here. And we're very hopeful that after your deliberation, you will find that under RULEPA, those uses are conditionally permitted, and you'll allow the church and CHF to go forward and actually have a process, which is all we're asking for. Many of the comments or questions you were asking today for information will be included in the environmental impact report for the project. And you and the public and everyone will have every opportunity to question and comment on the merits of the project and its impacts and its benefits. We very much look forward to having that conversation with you in the future and hope for today you'll allow us to have a process. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to very quickly address a couple of the comments.
State your name.
Sorry. My name is Dave Phillips.
Thank you.
Wanted to address some of the comments made in my rebuttal here. First of all, I want to take you back to our current facility in Pacoima. If you were to Google that site and from the air, there are a lot of trucks and containers on that facility. However, that is an industrial complex. There's 200,000 to 300,000 square feet of warehousing there, of which we lease or rent 40,000 square feet. So, again, I want to just restate that we have 2 trucks with 4 trailers on the site. I also didn't state in my presentation that our intention is not to leave Pacoima. If this project went through on Tierra Bajada, we would continue to maintain a presence at that facility in Pacoima. We would probably not lease all 40,000 square feet, but we would lease a portion of that. We would not be moving all of those truckloads of product, nor would we necessarily be moving those trucks and trailers to the Tierra Bajada property. It does not make sense for all of the churches and agencies that we serve in LA County to have to come to Tierra Bajada to receive those commodities. So I should have clarified that in my presentation. I also wanted to address the point of why, if we're just looking for an industrial building, why do we have to focus on open space? Well, that would be true if we were looking for an industrial building. That's not what we're looking for. What we are excited about with this project is the educational component of our ministry, and that is the desire to create an educational center and a compassion institute and to further the training and equipping that we do in the community. And I would just argue that would any of you like to try to sell a field trip experience to a school group, encourage them to come to Pacoima to an industrial complex, as opposed to coming to open space, this Tierra Bajada property? I think we can create an environment that is so much more conducive to bringing children and families to. We have a heart for Pacoima. We're not leaving Pacoima. But again, this particular space, in conjunction with Cornerstone's generosity, just makes absolute sense to us economically and from a program service point of view. Thank you.
Question?
Mr. Phillips, you mentioned about training. Would it be possible, let's say that there's an application for a CUP for a college on this site, and the college will have classrooms. Why couldn't you train your people at the college?
Well, again, I think part of my answer there would be the fact that we are separate entities. We are not an umbrella organization under Cornerstone or the college. And I think there would be some conflict, maybe in terms of scheduling and other issues. Jack, would you like to address that as well?
Well, I would just add that CHF has 3 buildings. One of them is the Learning and Training Center, and I think that's what you were pointing primarily to, but you would still have the need for the 2 relatively small warehouse distribution buildings where the goods would be delivered and packaged for distribution through Southern California and elsewhere. So the issue you raised would at best involve consolidating one of the buildings, but the other 2 would nonetheless be needed.
But Mr. Phillips said the primary purpose is training, and that training wouldn't be necessarily done in warehouses.
Yeah, I said training and the educational component of what we're doing. And again, I would want to point back to the desire to create this educational center for youth groups and school groups to come and become educated through an interactive experience, which you cannot create in a classroom setting that would be shared by another entity.
Thank you for that clarification.
You can see, Commissioner, if you look up at the graphic, that there are 3 buildings there, and there are 2. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there are 2 uses here. There is the Learning and Training Center, which is which building is that, Dave? The one in the...
That would be to the square.
Okay, that would be the one in the back.
Yeah.
But the other use is to have volunteers come onto the site and take the food that's delivered and combine it into food packs or other kinds of packages of items that are then distributed throughout Southern California and to some extent beyond.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Just a follow-up question. We were talking about warehouses, obviously, and storage, and 94,000 feet of construction plus. And I've gone through this luminous text of materials here, and I don't recall specifically. Maybe you can answer. What additional square footage is dedicated to your training and your non-warehouse operation? Or is
Well, I think first of all, when you look at the square footage that would be warehouse use, a good portion of that would be committed to our volunteer programs. Again, we would need space to set up an assembly line to do food pack production and assembly. Part of the component on the volunteer side would be a clean room. One of the things that we do in preparing our food packs is that we receive truckloads of rice and beans and other commodities that we purchase or get donated in bulk, and those need to be repackaged. So we need a clean room for that. So.
Yeah, and that's all within that structure we're talking about.
Correct.
I'm talking about the other 2 structures that'll be part of your facility. What's the square footage on those? Because I don't recall from reading this material.
Rick, do you have it?
The Learning and Training Center is about 28,000 feet, a little bit more, and the 2 warehouse structures, I think, are 29,000 and 32,000, something like that.
So that's the breakdown.
That's the breakdown.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Is there anything else from the applicant? Yes, Commissioner Rodriguez.
I have one more question that just occurred to me, and I think maybe one of the speakers, Mr. Parkinson, you presented yourself but didn't come up, and maybe you can answer this question. What's the enrollment of the college?
Currently, Trinity Bible College, I believe, has about 200 students.
Okay.
It is a combination of enrolled students, young people, and then the community uses the college for furthering their not for credit education.
Okay.
There may be more than that that are not taking classes for credit,
Okay.
but many folks throughout the county, not just the church, actually take advantage of the services.
Okay, and I'm assuming that's an accredited college or university?
It's in the process of accreditation, yes.
Okay, thank you.
If I may follow up, just Parsons, give me a comparison to the one I'm familiar with, Fuller. Where are you going? What are you looking at? Just briefly over.
Yeah, Fuller is a seminary
Right.
for postgraduate studies. Trinity Bible College issues the primary BS degrees, 2-year degrees, 4-year degrees. Their emphasis is Bible, so a lot of the students are completing some of their general ed classes at the local community college. Many of our students are enrolled at Moore Park or Camarillo or some of the others.
So your accreditation would be through the California Department of Education. Is that what you're looking for?
We're in the actually midway through the process, and that's a years-long process, but absolutely.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you. For the record, that was Rick Parkinson. Closing comments by staff.
I just wanted to clarify one point. In characterizing the CHF facilities as an industrial use, that was based upon an analysis of the uses as described in the application materials, going through the ordinance, trying to find where in the matrix those uses align with what is already described and defined in the ordinance. And as discussed in the staff reports on page 8, when you do that analysis, what you find is that the majority of these uses are found in commercial and in industrial zones, and the only zone in which all of the uses are allowed, be it by a plan development permit or a conditional use permit, is in the M1 industrial park zone. So that was the logic behind characterizing this as an industrial use. I didn't want to mischaracterize this use. So yeah, just wanted to make that point of clarification.
And for me, M1 is light, M3 is heavy.
Yeah, M1's an industrial park, and then M2 is limited industrial, and then M3 is the general industrial zone district. So there's 3 tiers, more or less.
So I'll just ask it again. M1's light, M3's heavy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Anything else? County Council?
Thank you, Chair Bartels and the Commission. I'd like to take this opportunity to just help you frame the issues and frame what you've been hearing and frame your discussion and your decision-making that's before you. First, a word of agreement. This is a matter that is not about the merits of this project. I do agree with my colleague, Mr. Rubens, about that. It is simply a question of whether or not this project should be able to apply for a conditional use permit, and that's why it's before you as a deferral matter. That's a decision that's normally made by the planning director, and that is being deferred to you. Simply, can they apply for a CUP in the open space? There are really 3 questions before you, Commission, and I'll read them to you, and I hope that that helps you in your analysis of this case. And this kind of goes back to my first comments earlier on about the 3 decisions that you have before you. First question is, did the planning director act properly in denying CHF's request to be deemed equivalent to either the nonprofit farm community organization or a principal structure related to agriculture for purposes of applying for a CUP in the open space zone? So that's question 1, and that goes directly to the appeal that is before you. I know that there's a disagreement about whether that is a secondary matter or a primary matter. Fact is, it is a question before you, and just to keep your record straight and what is before you, I would recommend that you deal with the appeal first. In the alternative, if the Planning Commission upholds the Planning Director's denial decision regarding CHF and equivalency, their alternative argument, and this is the one that the Cornerstone group has been putting forth as their primary argument, is the question, is CHF a CUP allowed use in the open space zone pursuant to the equal terms provision of our RULEPA? So first answer, answer the appeal. Second, in the alternative, they are also applying as a conditional use type of use in this open space zone via the RLUPA argument. And RLUPA, it's just tomato type of thing. The third question is very simple. Is Cornerstone Community Church, a CUP, allowed use in the open space zone pursuant to the RLUPA equal terms provision? With regards to the RLUPA equal terms provision, I think it'd be helpful just to read to you a portion of a recent case right here out of the Central District of California regarding RLUPA and equal terms provision. And so I'm just going to read directly from the case. And the case is called Vietnamese Buddhism Study Temple in America versus the City of Garden Grove. It was a case that was decided just in 2006. They began their analysis in that case by stating the following. In 2000, Congress passed the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, which is codified in 42 U.S.C. 2000 CC and following. This law was designed to protect churches and religious assemblies from the effect of zoning laws that impermissibly discriminate against religious assemblies and interfere with the free exercise of religion. Congress recognized that it was essential for religious groups to have a place of worship where their members can congregate and practice their faith together. And now here's a quote directly from the Senate itself when it passed this law. The right to assemble for worship is at the very core of the free exercise of religion. Churches and synagogues cannot function without a physical space adequate to their needs and consistent with their theological requirements. The right to build, buy, or rent such a space is an indispensable adjunct of the core First Amendment right to assemble for religious purposes. And that is a joint statement from Senator Hatch and Senator Kennedy on this act when it was passed in 2000. RLUPA was enacted in response to congressional findings that churches and other religious assemblies were being discriminated against both on the face of zoning ordinances and by the discriminatory exercise of the discretion by zoning boards. And that is as good a definition of what RLUPA is and what it intends to do in this case. There was case law cited in your Planning Commission package about the equal terms provision. There are two provisions within RLUPA that are of importance here. One is the substantial burden test or substantial burden argument, and the second being the equal terms provision. And you're only dealing with the equal terms provision at this point in time. According to the case law that was cited in the Planning Commission package here, the case of Lighthouse Institute for Evangelism versus the City of Long Branch, and that was a 2000 case. There are 5 elements that need to be discussed. And each time that you deal with an equal terms provision, it is up to the party asserting RLUPA to make a prima facie showing, or just a simple showing on the evidence of these 5 points. And the 5 points are as following. Number 1, is it a religious assembly or institution? Number 2, is that religious assembly or institution subject to land use regulation? Number 3, does that regulation treat religious assembly on less than equal terms with, number 4, a non-religious assembly or institution? And then 5, which has been discussed quite extensively in the public testimony here, is that whether or not that treatment causes no lesser harm to the interests the regulation seeks to advance. Okay, so is it a religious institution that causes no less harm to the interests the regulation seeks to advance? Again, what you're being asked to look at here in particular is the zoning matrix in the non-coastal zoning ordinance, which specifically says that for churches, synagogues, and other buildings used for religious worship, there is no CUP allowed use for the open space for that category of use. So that's really what's at issue here. So those are the 5 points that will help guide you through this analysis, and each one has been discussed to some degree in the presentations both by staff and both by the applicant here. So those are how you go through the second part, or the second 2 questions of my 3-part questions to you. When you get to the equal terms provision, does it meet those 5 points, and has the applicant made the case that they fall within that analysis set forth very recently in the Lighthouse case, which guides not only other courts, but zoning boards and planning commissions such as yourself in dealing with churches and their needs in seeking land use entitlements.
Would you go through those 5 one more time for me, please?
One more time.
If we could, you're reading from a script, it would be helpful to me to have that script in front of myself.
I would give this to you, except my notes are all over it. But let me just read it one more time. Maybe this will help you guide you through this whole thing here. In dealing with an equal terms provision of our RULEPA, 5 points. 1, is it a religious assembly or institution? That's number 1. Is it a religious assembly or institution? Number 2, is that religious assembly or institution subject to a land use regulation? Number 3, is that land use regulation treating the religious assembly on less than equal terms with, number 4, a non-religious assembly or institution? So that's your comparison there. And then fifthly, does the religious assembly or institution cause no lesser harm to the interest the regulation seeks to advance? And then that goes again to what is the purpose of the open space zone, and is this religious assembly or institution going to cause greater or lesser harm than what is already out there or already what is allowed in the open space? And on that last point, the comparisons that are made in the case law doesn't necessarily have to be whether or not the use was already there pre-post adoption of the open space zone. Going to your question, Commissioner Molitor, it really is a question of what is allowed by those checkboxes in the matrix. And if the checkbox in the matrix says it's allowed, it doesn't matter if there was an actual project that got to use that checkbox. It's simply the matrix. And the matrix says checkbox in the box or no. That's really the comparison that is here. What the applicant has done here is go further into the analysis similar to what has been done in other case law, which is to find non-secular or non-religious comparators, or what you would compare it to. And looking at it from a similarly situated standpoint, borrowing language from civil rights law, they've made that case, and so they give you a real-life example of what they believe to be no lesser harm than what is already out there.
May I ask another question, please? It's my understanding that the planning director's recommendation or non-recommendation is based upon the ordinance which says churches should not be permitted in open space. That's my assumption. So, and I asked this question to the attorney, do we have an ordinance? I guess the question is the ordinance illegal? And I don't know if I'm qualified to make a decision whether that ordinance. I don't wear a black robe and get paid all that extra money.
I understand. And that's a good question. And that is the same question that was faced by the planning director. The planning director, by ordinance, is given the primary responsibility to enforce the non-coastal zoning ordinance as is. There is a little bit of leeway in there when there's questions of definition or when it's not spoken of. But her job is not to rewrite the matrix or to bend the matrix based on circumstances that come up on a day-to-day basis. And so that is why the deferral matter is before you. And as the Planning Commission, with much more legislative as well as policy-making powers invested in you, that deferral is made. And that deferral is allowed by the non-coastal zoning ordinance on issues such as this. And so it doesn't even have to be a question of black or white in the matrix. It could be simply it's a controversial matter and the planning director decides to push it to the supervisorial representatives on the Planning Commission. It's as simple as that. And to answer the question about the illegality of it, going back to Mr. Rubin's comment, I don't think the question here is whether or not the zoning ordinance is unconstitutional. The question is, does this federal law, our RULEPA, apply in this case? And does it meet the standards of our RULEPA or not? So in the case law, and again, there is hundreds of cases on our RULEPA on different aspects of it, not only churches, but also prisoners and their religious rights, because that's what it also covers. It would take a long time to just try to hash that out, but for the simple purposes of our discussion here, it's a simple question of, does it meet our RULEPA standards or not?
Excuse me, just then, if we decide it does, we are ignoring the ordinance that says they're not supposed to be. The churches aren't allowed in the open space. So if we go with RULEPA, do we have any problems going against an ordinance that's on file in this county? And that's what we're a county commission, determining whether something fits with an ordinance or not. If we go with RULEPA, then we're denying the ordinance. Is that correct?
Correct for this purpose, yes. And that's what the law has been used to do. The cases, all of which, the one case both cases I mentioned to you, the city of Long Branch and the city of Garden Grove, were explicitly told that they could not exercise certain zoning ordinances and restrictions the way that they had originally planned to do, because our RULEPA says that under the equal terms provision, they were allowed to have the ability to even apply for that CUP. So that's exactly what that federal law is all about.
Thank you for that.
I have two questions regarding a larger context than this narrow point, and it'll help me inform my decision about these narrow points. How does this relate to save open space and agricultural resources? That is it an ordinance? That law, and how does it relate to the Greenbelt Agreement that I think is a work in process? And there was some question about the Reagan Library, and I thought that was going to be annexed to City Simi. So how do those other goals of the county relate to just open space in general?
Well, the goals that are expressed in the general plan, there are goals in the general plan with regards to open space, and those are reflected in the non-coastal zoning ordinance, and it is what it is. As far as SOAR is concerned, there was a point made early on, I believe, in the applicant's presentation, that they are not seeking a general plan amendment, and SOAR only applies if there is going to be a general plan amendment changing the land use designation. They're not seeking the change of a land use designation in this case. So in that sense, they avoid or get themselves out of a SOAR type of analysis. With regards to the Greenbelt is a resolution. It's a joint agreement between the cities. Whether or not it has the force and effect of ordinance, I don't believe it does. It's not enforced via the same provisions as your non-coastal zoning ordinance. As far as annexing the Reagan Library to Simi Valley, I can't speak to that. I have no knowledge about that.
Does staff have knowledge about the work that's being done to have the Reagan Library annexed to Simi Valley rather than being county?
It's my understanding that process is moving forward. I don't know exactly where it is right now, but it's my understanding it's moving forward into the city.
Okay. Do we need to find all 5 of those findings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Because there's no doubt that it's been demonstrated that the church is religious and that it's subject to land use regulations. And it's the 4th one. It's the 4th finding that right now I'm not convinced of, that we allow non-religious uses that are equivalent to a religious use. Do you have to find all 5?
I think that the 3rd and 4th points is whether or not the land use regulation treats a religious assembly on less than equal terms with a non-religious assembly or institution. That is the question. And the question is, does that checkbox in the matrix, in your non-coastal zoning ordinance, that says you cannot have churches in the open space, does that treat a religious assembly on less than equal terms with a non-religious assembly? In this case, you have the comparisons of the Reagan Library, the Todd Road Jail, the Thomas Aquinas College, that are allowed, that have been allowed in the open space via a CUP.
Okay, I'm getting back to the purpose of the open space zone in the county, and besides the the green part of it, there are some uses of land that are appropriate in the open space. I'm recalling a shooting range. Would you want that in the city? Would you want it near people? No, you want it away from people, so that there are certain legitimate purposes of open space land use regulations that protect the health and safety of people, and also just call for the orderly development of the region. So, it's hard not to get compelled by the merits of a project that we're likely going to be seeing in the future. How would you answer Mr. Rubin's plea to allow us to have a process? I think I asked you, isn't there another process that they could go through and have and still be able to attain their goal eventually, but just have to go through the process that we have right now that's available to them, that's available to anybody if somebody wanted to come in and set up an equivalent charity or other facility.
I think the question of how would I answer that question, the question of giving them a process, that's the ultimate question that's before your commission, is to allow them in or not. And that's a question that the planning director answers every single day of the week when applications come in for CUP. Should he get a CUP? And she goes through the matrix for that analysis. In this case, it is different because there is a federal law that is invoked in this case and potentially applicable based on your findings. I go back, I believe, to my understanding of the applicant's testimony and their presentation is that they had the option, certainly, to go for a general plan amendment and a change in the land use designation through that process, and they chose not to. And that's exactly what it is. It's an option. They chose to use this route instead of going through that route.
Then how does that fit in with the goals of the county, with the Greenbelt Agreement, with the annexation that's moving forward, and the voter initiative that was overwhelmingly passed, I don't know how many years ago, 10 years ago, that we're going to have separation between the cities, that we're going to have appropriate land uses? How does that mesh in? It seems to go around and try and find a crack through all those other goals. And where they have this other, kind of reminds me of the weddings. Just being able to follow through the process, and you get where you want to go eventually. It might not be an easy road, but it would be a road worth traveling.
I'm trying to understand the foundational basis of your question, and how does RULEPA play into all of these locally enunciated and approved type of policies with regards to open space, whether it be SOAR or the Greenbelt Alliance. That's exactly what RULEPA was designed to do. If the legislative history is clear about example after example about how land use plans, zoning ordinances, and regulations were used either in a discriminatory basis against religious assemblies as applied or as they stood. And that's why RULEPA was brought in and was passed and signed into law by President Clinton in 2000 for that very purpose, was to...
Hold on. I have to stop you there. I don't see any expressed goal saying that a mosque, a temple, or any other kind of religious assembly is not allowed in open space because we're not going to allow religion in the county open space. There's nothing. What you're saying, there's nothing expressed in the purpose of all these goals to prevent that. Isn't that correct?
Are you referring to SOAR at this point in time?
No, I'm talking about the purpose of the open space zone and with regard to RULEPA.
The open space policies are clearly stated in the general plan. I don't think it speaks to religion.
No, so there's there's no express purpose to keep religion out. It's just these land uses. And there is, I see that they do have a process. I don't see that they're being treated less than equally. I see them being treated just the same. Anybody would be treated just the same if they wanted to occupy open space zone that didn't, fit in our current goals and policies and ordinances and our guidelines, even if they don't have the force of law.
Mr. Chair, real quick, we're still in the open hearing. We're just getting staff rebuttal. We have not closed the public hearing, so it's not time for our deliberation. Thank you.
Are there any other questions of staff at this time? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing. So everyone knows, this means that it's time for us to take up this issue, and it's time for you to sit very, very quietly, and we'll see what we can do here. We may be posing questions to staff, and if we need to, we may be posing questions outside of that, and at that point, there's a process that will follow, but that's where we are in this hearing. Commission? Commissioner Weissner.
This obviously begs a lot of questions, which we have already gone through. I'm going to try and go way out there and come back, if I may. The director wisely, which proves to me she's a very smart woman, lateraled the ball. Someday we will get her for that, but that's where we are, and that's why we get paid the big bucks, as I like to say. So, what it is, if I can, the narrow scope, even though there's larger questions, is, do we allow the appeal to be upheld and allow the CUP process to move forward as presented by the applicant, or do we deny the appeal and uphold the director's decision that the equivalency argument, RULEPA, does not apply? No, okay, that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to frame all this so we get clear on what we're being asked to decide here today, because there's a lot of issues surrounding it. So,
not to interrupt.
No.
On page 60, it has the more narrowly focused thing. It's on page 60.
So again, that's what I'm trying to get to. What is it we were asked to decide today? How we get there is going to be the process. So let me back up to one of us that's been up here for a very long time, has gone through the 14 green belts and the 15 green belt agreements, the guidelines for orderly development, the imposition of SOAR, the general plan rules, the whole concept. Again, the green belt workshops were specifically done because of the misunderstanding. They were basically handshake agreements, resolutions that the cities would agree to certain things if the county agreed to hold the line on the zoning. As we found between the city of Oxnard and Ventura, there's a green belt agreement which neither one has signed for each other. So again, they have no force and effect in law, if you will. SOAR came along with its very definitive reasons to try to ensure the people's will that we do not expand into these areas, given certain guidelines. However, open space is a designated land use since 1968 that's been amended, and we have revised it several times, and we have visited that, and it has been clearly stated such things as the Reagan Library, the different colleges, the Toll Jail, Toll and Waste Landfill, on down the line. One specific person, the Juvenile Detention Center on Vineyard. So the question before my mind is, the matrix says no churches. The matrix says if CHF is to come into here, that it has to have sufficient nexus, that was my question earlier, of the agricultural community which we allow open space uses. And I'll give you a specific example. Greenhouses. We've had long discussions up here about greenhouses. They have a direct nexus to the agricultural community, providing jobs, workforce, but also producing agricultural products, as opposed to what I'm seeing with the CHF. And then we've also gone through those entities such as Tierra Farms, Breconiers, etc., to how much do we allow them to expand their commercial use but still retain that nexus to the agricultural community. So I'm seeing a split here, but to get back to you as far as the federal law, that starts the whole nother issue. You've had now the Central District Court of the State of California stating the federal law does apply to the state, which applies to the county, which applies to us locally. Therefore, we must consider it. Consider it. But in that consideration is, the word is equivalency. That means, is it equitable? Is it 80-20? Is it 49-51? Do we treat the TUD the same as we treat this, or are they imbalanced? And that's where I think we're at. We get to decide that gray area today. Is it 80-20? Is it 90-10? Is it 51-49? And I think the courts in this state have said you apply that. And that's what's being asked by the appellant. And that's where we're coming to. The open space matrix says no church and nothing that is not relevant to the agricultural community. And I think that's what the director has asked us to decide on. There's just my little spiel. I'm just trying to get organized in my head too, so I just want to follow up from there.
On page 60, the appeal that's before us says, is this project that's going to be before us, is it equivalent to these facilities and centers for farm workers, or is it equivalent to structures related to agriculture? And two things really stand out in my mind. One is that principally CHF appears to provide service internationally, and that's a wonderful thing. But its principal charter is not related to farm workers in Ventura County, and certainly doesn't isn't a greenhouse, and they're not pretending to be. So I think that's clear in all this, that they are not equivalent. And also what's really sticks in my mind is, does it actualize the purpose of the OS zone? And that's where it gets really complicated to me. It seems to me that that CHF, its facilities in Pacoima right now are in an industrial area. The kinds of things that they would be doing could fit in the county. So I don't see that the county is interfering. Also, I do see another process whereby they could go forward with their project. So it's just a question of which path they take. I think that clearly on the first part, that they are not equivalent uses because of what CHF's purpose is. But the question about RULEPA is beyond my level of expertise, certainly.
Thank you. That helps my thinking too. We have two issues here, and I would like to take them first and second. I think Commissioner Weissner and Commissioner Adukas is referring to that. I would like to focus on the appeal first, on CHF. Does it meet does it meet the nexus between serving the farm workers of Ventura County? And I think you pointed out that's not its intent. That's a secondary thing, and that's been admitted too by Mr. Phillips, that they do support Ventura County to an extent, but that's not their mission. So I would like to deal with that first one first, and maybe someone can make a motion as to what we could do, and then get into the complicated one.
I'd like to commend the plan director for passing the ball. She is a very astute lady. I appreciate the way you framed the issues in front of us. It also helps me try to clear this in my mind, and going along with Commissioner Molitor. Yeah, let's deal with the intent of the appeal and whether or not CHF is an appropriate use of that land. I have a problem also it seems like a real stretch to create that nexus between CHF and the intent of the open space and ag, preservation of ag and ag acreage in the county. I certainly appreciate everything that's being done by the organization. I think it's extremely commendable and valuable and needs to go forward. The issue is whether or not this is the appropriate space to do it, given the existing ordinances that exist. The issue of the matrix, obviously, is, it's clear. It defines. It says no churches, education, that type of stuff. Are we going to make a decision initially on the directors, either the director's denial, and before we proceed with the secondary issues?
If I may, Mr. Chair, let me see if I can help. I think what we need to do here is bifurcate this because, as you astutely pointed out, Commissioner Dukas, on page 60, I think it's framed very clearly when it states, deferring to the Planning Commission the threshold decision whether or not Cornerstone Community Church can apply for a CUP as a church and the CH facilities on land with OS 40 zoning district. I think what I'd like to move at this point in time is to bifurcate those two and make a ruling or make a motion on the CHF facility, and then revisit whether or not the church can apply as a CUP. And I have, my logic for that is going back to the federal law. Whether or not a church is being treated equivalent as a college or the Reagan Library or something like that under the matrix, because the matrix says no church. And that's what we're being asked as far as the federal law. Are we treating a church fairly or not because of its religious status? So I think my personal opinion is I think we can split the one up because I don't think there's sufficient nexus to connect the CHF. But I would like to come back and visit the other issue of whether or not the fact that OS 40 does not allow a church under the federal law, are we treating them as an equivalent or not? So at this time, Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion to uphold the planning director's decisions as it relates to the CHF does not meet the criteria under the current zoning.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
I would second that.
A motion is second. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Motion carries.
So now I'd like to get back to this conversation now. I think, and as county council has put out, churches are not allowed in this matrix at OS 40. However, they've also asked for a college, which is allowed. So the question before us is, do we allow the process to move forward under either us deciding that the college and the church, we have to treat them the same, even though it's not a permitted use at this time. I would have preferred if they come in and said, we want to be a Bible college and we're going to have a chapel in there like St. Thomas Aquinas had done. I would make our decision a lot easier, but the camel's in the tent and we got to deal with it now. All right? So the question before us then is, do we allow them to apply for the permit to begin the process under a CUP? And I know Commissioner Dukas would like to see them go forward on a general plan amendment to change the zoning.
Or they can apply for a text amendment. Wasn't that one of the things that was allowed to do? I'm talking about the process and whether or not it's going to be,
Sure.
One way or another. Either way, it's going to get to the same place.
Well, I'm just saying, so we can either uphold the decision that churches are not allowed, and we know where the next step's going on that one.
But they could apply for a text amendment. Didn't you say that at the very beginning of the hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
County Council?
I just want to make clear, I agree with Mr. Weissner's approach of bifurcating the appeal from the RLULEPA issues. The RLULEPA issue was the argument in the alternative for CHF as well. So CHF is also seeking RLULEPA application, not just the church. I just wanted to make that clear.
No, that was totally understood.
Okay.
That's why I made the whole argument about the 80-20, 51-49. My opinion is the law and the courts have said you've got to make that equitable decision. In my mind, the nexus just was not there, and I think my fellow commissioners agreed with me on that.
Commissioner Bartel, County Council, let's say there was an application in front of us just for CHF. Would we have the authority? Because that's not a church. Could they claim, now, I know they're saying they can claim RULEPA too, but I would have difficulty with that. Just them alone. They're now attached to the church and the college, but if they were...
Before we turn it to County Council, I think that's the purpose of bifurcating.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Weissner.
Okay, so to me, that's clearly the two things that we have to decide. The courts have said you must follow this federal law. And that's, we have a religious entity that is asked to be treated equally, even though the zoning matrix does not permit them. So therefore, the question to my mind is, do we tell the director that she was correct, that churches are not permitted, and that they cannot proceed under a CUP because it's not permitted? Or, in the alternative, as has been argued by Cornerstone and their counsel properly, is the federal law exists, it has been held up in the Central District Court, which we're under, and the fact is we have to make that determination, number 4, is whether or not we are equally treating college, government, jail, the same as this religious entity. And I think that's where I'm at the 5149 right now, to be honest with you. So I'd any input I'd appreciate.
Commissioner Dukas.
I do want to say to everyone who's assembled here, I was so impressed with how you came in, how you treated each other, the tone that we got from all the emails and the communications and stuff. It's a worthy thing that you are doing, and it is going to come before us. And it sounds like it's just how to get there. My thinking is that we can't become swayed by too much of the details of how many people they help, the reach of and the power that they possess to do good in the world. It's to do our job and to narrowly focus and look at the construct of what we have. And what we have is a set of goals and policies for how we're going to develop. And it's clear. It's clear. So, I do not think that there is any intent or any result of keeping a religion out. For example, I mean, this is going to sound really bad, but it popped into my head. Would we have the same kind of unanimity if it were a mosque with a tower, you know, a call to prayer tower? So you have a minaret. Just because we like what you do and stuff, we can't get like focused on that as much as these, you know, real dry things about the purpose of the open space zone and why we allow jails in open space. How is that green? Well, you know, we've already explained why that is. I don't think that that we treat these entities less than we do ones with non-religious purposes, because the ones with non-religious purposes that we allow in open space actualize the purpose of the OS zone, and there's, you know, several of them. And one is, you know, to promote efficient municipal services and facilities by confining urban development to defined development areas. This is something that we're working towards. It's a work in progress, and this just seems to not fit with what we have, and we're trying to invent something and change things and reinterpret it and try to make it fit. And I see that they have another process that's open to them. So my inclination would be to find that it's not our intent, and it's not the purpose to stop what they're doing. It's just to guide how they're going to do it. That's my opinion.
If I could
Please.
jump in here. We just heard the brothers last week, and this is a nursing home facility in the Ojai that went through. It was the first SOAR vote in the county, and all of these same issues were aired. I guess I have a larger issue, and that is that my reading of RULEPA is about access to process. And this is the CEQA argument that's being made for me of, I've got a categorical exemption, and then we sit up here and say, well, but what about all that analysis? Well, I have a categorical exemption. That means the analysis is over. So my concern is that, number one, there is a process, there is access to a process. We do not preclude access to a process at all. That's number one. Number two, this is a complicated piece of property that's come and gone. And number three is, I look at this scheme in our big book about where this sits in relationship to the urbanized areas in our county, and I agree with Commissioner Adukas. It's not about what it is, it's about what is the process for allowing a landowner, equivalency, a landowner, no labels to that landowner, to move through a process. Come to the planning director, I say, I want to do this thing. Planning director goes to the existing matrix and says, can't happen. Try redefining your project. I understand that back and forth has gone on a lot. I will admit, with all due respect, we have projects that spend 5 years in this process, so the fact that you've only been in for a year, this is complicated. And I don't mean that lightly. What you're proposing is a complete change of the current land use. It is grass and stuff. There aren't people or cars, or there's no intensity. I can go out there and graze stuff, right? So for me, it's about, let's stop the analysis by declaring equivalency and just move into a CUP. I do not believe that that's what RULEPA went for. What I believe RULEPA went for is to say, look at the use and its equivalency and then go through that process. It doesn't mean end the process. If it requires a SOAR vote to be in the process, if it requires, and the other part is saying that this is based on that was then, if we want to go back to the way I understood open space originally created, it was everything else. Mines can go in open space,
Cemeteries.
Cemeteries. So, and all of those uses go through a process. What you are proposing is a complicated conditional approval that has everything in the kitchen sink, including an industrial use that currently exists in an M1 zone. Okay. So where I am with this is to say there is an equivalency because it doesn't support the open space zone. And if this use wants to move forward, I agree with Commissioner Dukas, there is a method within the zoning ordinance to move it forward. That's where I'm. The other piece is I really get stuck, and it was raised on both sides of the argument, that people move into a space with some assumptions, and our open space assumptions are it's open space. Open space, and I live in an ag zone, but it's existing community, and it intensifies and de-intensifies over time. My concern is that we're talking about what we aren't instead of what we are. And that's where I get stuck. Permit what you are. Don't tell me what you aren't. If you are a completely successful distribution of food, great, define it. If you are a burgeoning, exciting, evangelical campus, great. I expect you to go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and be permitted to do that. But don't tell me what you aren't. This is not about a pastoral. Pastoral is, I don't hear cars, I don't see power lines, you know. The Reagan Library was a growth-inducing use. We acknowledged it. This is an intensification of growth-inducing use. So where I am is, go use the process. Don't come and make a religious argument. I would prefer to support the use instead of somehow truncate our process. So, Commissioner Rodriguez?
I don't know what I could add to that. I too am stuck. We have the ordinance in front of us and the intent of the open space, and it's pretty clear what's allowed and what's not allowed. The RULEPA argument certainly clouds the water. Does it trump the ordinance is the issue. County Council hasn't said that our ordinance is invalid as the text reads. So in essence, in my mind, by disregarding the text within the ordinance, we're making a legal decision that maybe should be made in another venue and not here. And so that's kind of where I'm going.
If I can follow up with that, just again, and I appreciate the deliberation from my fellow commissioners. Like I said, because we've been through all our battles, but at the same time, I wanted to hear what you had to say. So let me just throw this little analysis in. First Amendment is very clear about the state Congress shall not create nor shall abridge the exercise thereof of religion. But also the 10th Amendment is very clear. That which is not specifically reserved to belongs and resides in the states. So that's where I think we're at here. The states have, the Constitution is real clear about the fact they're not going to decide what the school zone speed should be. And one of them is the fact how we use our land. And so as people, we go through a process and we make a determination. The determination was no churches in an open space. And that's what the director has now asked us, given this new federal law. What I've heard from my colleagues is we have given them due process. We have provided avenues for them, and I think that supports the intent of what County Council read from Senators Kennedy and the other on what the purpose is to make sure they're not discriminated against and have no opportunity or very little opportunity to move forward in a process. So that's why I would like at this point in time to move forward to the motion upholding the planning director's denial of the church as a CUP in this area, and the fact that we have duly deliberated the 5 elements of the equal burden that County Council has given us, and the fact that we feel that this entity has not been treated unfairly or less, but however that the purpose we must follow is our general plan, and as the holders of the gate, if you will, of the land use, that we uphold the planning director's denial.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Chair Bartels may just interject at this point.
Yes. Well, let's see if we have a.
Okay.
If the motion stands, and then we can deal with that. Is there a second?
I'll second.
County Council.
There has been no decision by the planning director to deny a CUP application to the Cornerstone Community Church or to CHF. This is simply a deferral of that initial decision to your commission. So there has been no decision made as to whether or not this is in the matrix or not in the matrix. It's a deferral to you to make that threshold decision. Does Cornerstone and CHF get the opportunity to apply for a CUP and go through the process of having the merits of their project analyzed by all the attendant state laws, regulations, as well as local objectives, goals, principles, etc. That is the question before you. That is the deferral part, and that is the bifurcation. One was the appeal. You already addressed that on a 5-0 vote. Now the question comes to you is our RULEPA's equal terms provision, and I have to be very clear about this, equal terms does not mean equivalency, you know, and these terms, we use them a lot in the legal world, and I know it causes a lot of people a bit of heartburn and upset to hear these terms bandied about. But the equal terms provision in our RULEPA, although it borrows from equal protection rights and things of that nature, it's not an equivalency argument. I go back to that language that was cited by the applicant in this case, and clearly this Federal Court of Appeal has said that if a land use regulation treats religious assemblies or institutions on less than equal terms with religious assemblies or institutions that are no less harmful to the governmental objectives in enacting the regulation, that regulation without more fails under our RULEPA. Commissioner Rodriguez, you asked and you stated that I did not make a decision legally as to the legitimacy or constitutionality of this ordinance. That was not the question for County Council, and really that is a question deserved for your body alone. That's why the deferral was made. It was not a question that Planning Director deferred to County Council for me to give her an opinion as to what the law said, and then she would go on that basis. It was decided that it would be your board that would decide the application of our RULEPA, and under this law, if you decide that our RULEPA is applicable in this case, then the regulation of the matrix not having a check mark next to church would then fail. That's really what is before you, and that is a decision that is obviously given to you, and I've tried to give you the guidance through that analysis. One more point. It talks about land use regulation treating a religious assembly. Commissioner Adukas, you talked about intent and the purpose of what you're trying to do as a commission. It really isn't about your intent, your purposes, or what you're trying to do. It's really the regulation itself. Looking at the four corners in the black and white of the regulation. It's a simple box. It has land uses on one side. It has the area designations on the top, and then it has little boxes and little icons throughout. That's all you're looking at this point in time. And it says, is that a process that this church and this entity can avail itself of via federal law, knowing what the federal law was done to do when it was first passed in 2000?
So if I understand County Council, you're asking me to amend the motion.
I didn't use that word, but you can assume that.
Reconsider.
Okay. Yeah. Could we, how about if we withdraw? And
I'll withdraw the motion.
Is there a withdrawal by second?
Withdraw.
Okay. Back to Commissioner Weissner.
Okay. I would like to make a motion then, the fact that for the threshold decision that the ordinance is appropriate, with the fact we have deliberated and considered all the other aspects, both of the federal law and the case law and the general plan, et cetera, and that the fact that the CUP for the church and the denial, not the denial, but the fact that the director did not want to process it was appropriate.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So where we are is the appeal has been denied, and the equivalency argument you now have to either take up with the Board of Supervisors within 10 days or come back and use another of the processes within the zoning ordinance. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, we'll take 10 minutes. Session.
Thank you, Chair Partells. I have just a few items to discuss. We have the appeal, this wedding appeal. I believe you guys know that your decision to uphold my decision that those notices of violation stand were appealed to the board. That appeal hearing is scheduled for the 14th, next Tuesday. So that's scheduled to be heard at the board on Tuesday. As far as what is coming up before your Planning Commission on November 6th, the long-awaited Piru area plan is expected to be before you. I believe that's what I have on my agenda as the next hearing we have. Danielle, is there hearings before then? There's nothing before then. So on the 6th, is everybody planning on being here on the 6th? Could be a long hearing, yes. That's what I have going on. We're ongoing, our ongoing process on this Get to Excellence plan that we presented before the board several weeks ago, where we're updating our initial study assessment guidelines, our website, our policies and procedures. And the county does have a new website. The County Planning Division does have a new website. If you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at it, it's really good. We're really proud of it. www.ventura.org, and it's /planning. So you can review it. If you have any questions or comments on that, or anything that you would ever like to see us add to it, we'd be happy to take your comments on that, and we can make those corrections very quickly these days. So that's what I have. Do you have anything for me? No?
Just a general comment.
Yes.
We've had a couple of issues over the time I've been here that deal with the issues of traffic, of potential volume as it relates to public safety. The process, the staff report process in my mind, seems to be vacant as far as those types of statistics, which are readily available probably with a phone call to local CHP or local sheriff's department to get information on traffic accidents within a given time frame, as an example. Is there any way to incorporate that kind of background information for the board? Because that's often an argument that's used either for or primarily against something going forward. And I can specifically recall the issue when it came up below the rock there by Neptune's Gnats. Is that something
That's part of the initial study assessment thresholds. All of them are being updated right now, and right now that's the Sheriff's Department primary responsibility to answer. And so when we're going through that process, we can ask the Sheriff's Department if they are interested in putting that on every case. Right now we do it on a case-by-case basis if we think that that's an interesting fact or figure that we need for perhaps a mining operation or where we might be challenged on that. We do ask the Sheriff's Department or the CHP, and they do provide us with that information. But we don't routinely require that on every discretionary permit.
Okay, thank you. If I could follow up with that.
Sure.
And so what happens is, if you're aware of the area, the argument gets made, so you're going to allow the death of small children. I mean, it gets over the top.
Right.
If there was an accident matrix or a calls for service matrix, it would end the discussion before it began, or illuminate this discussion. Because I agree, we keep hearing this traffic congestion. Okay, what does that mean? Does that mean people drive slowly, or does that mean that there are accidents? And the argument is, well, but there are accidents. Well, maybe it just means that it's congested.
Right, and I agree with that. I'm not sure, though, going back, I'm not sure if we'd want to do it every time, because you wouldn't want the Sheriff's Department to have to run that kind of detail on a 2-lot subdivision. But perhaps on a 20-lot subdivision, maybe there would be thresholds that we would decide that's saying we want that information at this threshold. And that's the perfect opportunity for us to do that right now, since we're all in a room updating the initial study thresholds that we could.
Yeah, and that's all we're asking, I think. Sure. That's all I'm asking, because even though I've been gone for 7 years, we've had the system in place for a long time where the entire jurisdiction, in this case the sheriff, is broken down and identified by reporting districts, or RDs, every place. And it came up last week with Lake Piru and the issues of activity and calls for service and that type of stuff. There was a lot of comments made about it, but no supporting information or documentation, either for or against. And so when the staff report alludes to those things, it would be beneficial I mean, certainly I could have done it myself. I could have called somebody over there and said, "Hey, this is so and so. Give me the statistics for RD number 3456 for the last 2 years," and I would have gotten a printout of all calls for service. It's all computerized, and I suspect the CHP has the ability to do the same thing.
They do. They do. Okay, very good. Thank you.
If I may, just to follow up on that, that brings a question from the last time here. County Council, and it came up today in our disclosures. I know we have broad investigative powers once something is going to be presented in front of us. How broad is that? I mean, if we go into Google, if he wants to call somebody at the Sheriff's Department, I mean, we have this tribal knowledge that we're supposed to use. When is too much too much? Or would you like to come back and tell us that at some point?
I could come back and tell you, but the short answer is that if you do that type of investigative work, whether it be a simple drive-by, an intensive internet search, or a Google thing, that's why I asked that those pictures be put into the evidence. The key question, anytime it comes up for, biased decision-making or something that's outside the record and a quasi-adjudicative decision is, was it before the agency so that the other parties could respond to it? If you have knowledge that you're not disclosing, that's not on the record, and you're using it to make that key decision, then it becomes a problem. And that's why the disclosures are there, and that's why they're as extensive as they are there. If it's not in the record and you're relying upon it, you need to disclose it. That's the bottom line.
Okay. Go ahead. No, I just need this point of clarification. All right, but if it's already in my head, do I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out here.
There's too much in there.
Yeah, I know, that's...
We can go
I need more alcohol to reduce
we can do a much broader analysis. I mean, that's my first blush right now. My whole role here is to make certain that your decisions are upheld and are as legally compliant as possible. That's why I always err on the side of disclosure rather than non-disclosure. And if you are using something, let's say you have it in your head that you knew that this intersection was a dangerous intersection, you knew that from all the years that you've driven through there. It's not in the staff report, but hey, I'm going to use that information when I make my decision. That should be disclosed. I mean, that should say, hey, I know, I've been there, and it does come out in a lot of your discussions.
Okay, and if that knowledge, I'm looking forward to the Simi Valley landfill expansion, because I have a lot of experience and knowledge of the operators and the history of it, and people who worked on
and you introduced me to a new term, an opposite of turbidity.
and so
I'll forget that.
and so would it be appropriate then to have any of those concerns ahead of time and provided so that the applicant or whoever is an interested party would be able to answer them, know what they are and answer them? And how soon would that have to be provided?
Well, the whole point of disclosure is, again, if you had that level of knowledge, you knew the players, you knew the processes, you knew the policies, you knew all of that, that really needs to come out so that you're operating on a much broader amount of information than the rest of your commissioners, and that if that is the case, then they need to know, the applicant as well as staff, so that they can address those issues and say, well, I know that you know the policy, but that's been changed, or something like that, You never know. So they need to know so that they can address it and make it a part of their presentation, because they do have the burden of proof.
Okay.
Okay, which brings me to the Pyro area plan. I know all the players, and this disclosure statement, I'm going to need to make sure that all of those disclosures are made. There is not a conflict, but there's just intimate knowledge of what goes on out there. I mean, I play music in the middle of Pyru with good friends, so it's not like this gets, the county's too small. There's too many folks playing here, and we've all experienced that. But part of what I want to talk about in that disclosure statement is nobody asked for, no vote was offered, all of that sort of stuff, but also then to just list those relationships. Is that where you're trying to go with this?
I'd be more than happy. We can agendize this for maybe a study session on that disclosure aspect, and we can just kind of do it on a programmatic boom, boom, boom. Let's talk with theory, go down to principles, go down to practice.
Because we're only seeing those kind of projects right now. Anything else?
And then if we're going to agendize that item, is there anything else that you're interested in being trained on or more knowledge on? Is there anything else in that agendized item that you think we could assist
I would,
with?
if we could address the scope and duties of a planning commissioner as stated by statute, but also then implied. Like I said, the investigative ability. That's implied. For us to come to a decision, we should have the ability to ask questions, have whoever come down before us, those kinds of things. So range and scope of duties and responsibilities, but not only the ones specific in the code, but those that perhaps we have found that are implied.
Very good. Yes.
Because, this goes back to Amundsen, in many ways, opened a can of worms. Amundsen also put us right at the edge of defining what those investigative and how we even did it. So, I think we're further down the road there. This whole truncation of process by federal statute or federal law is frankly concerning to me, because and maybe talking that through from a legal.
I think it's probably best not to go further into that discussion.
I understand. So as we go do the initial study, I guess the other one is, it sure would be nice when it's in draft to look at the initial study guide checklist, because I have some opinions about that as we bring that forward. Before it just comes to be adopted, maybe we should take a look at it.
In its entirety?
Yeah, I know it's a big document, but
Well, no, I mean, it's not, but it's funny the way that document is put together, that the board has delegated responsibilities to the director of each agency to kind of go off and do it and update it, and a lot of them haven't been updated since 98 or before, and so, we're trying to get this cohesive effort to bring it back together and say, I think we all need to be in a room and understand what everybody is doing to make it one cohesive document. But then it's not a document that comes back in its entirety and is adopted by the board, which was interesting. So the way that so we could bring it back here for a kind of a study session, but the way that it gets approved and adopted is a little bit unusual.
even in the face of Mr. Berg's comments, I find that fascinating, because it means that it's going to be at war with itself.
Yeah, we are trying to make that cohesive, and let me think of a way that I can bring that back down here.
Okay.
It sounds like the classic committee to create a horse and we get the camel.
Okay. Anything else? Commission, I would, this was an interesting one and a rough one, and I appreciate everybody who's sitting up here, because this is why I like doing this, because of you all. Stand adjourned.